"I didn't come here to beg, Mr. Dawson. I came here to tell you the truth, even if it costs me everything." She stood in the doorway of the most powerful man in Wyoming, 19 miles from home in the dead of winter, with nothing but a letter of apology she hadn't written and a pride she refused to surrender. Her father sent her, but she came as herself. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Evelyn Carter saddled her horse and rode toward Dawson Ridge, she made herself one promise. She would not cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of any of them. Not in front of the man who held her family's fate in his hands like a coin he hadn't decided whether to spend or throw away. She had cried enough the night before alone in the dark of the small cabin that still smelled like her mother's lavender soap, even though her mother had been gone for 11 years. She had pressed her face into the pillow and let herself feel the full weight of what the morning was going to ask of her. And then she had gotten up, washed her face in cold water, braided her hair, and told herself that today was not a day for grief. Today was a day for something harder than grief. Today was a day for dignity. Her father had handed her the letter at the kitchen table, his hands trembling the way they always did now. Not from cold, but from something that lived deeper inside him. Something that had started the night the mine deal collapsed and had never fully stopped. He couldn't look her in the eyes when he pushed the envelope across the wood. He just said, "Take it to Dawson. Tell him I meant to make it right. Tell him." And then his voice had broken, and he had turned away toward the window, and Evelyn had taken the letter without saying a word, because there were no words that fit the shape of that moment. She was 24 years old. She had never asked anyone for anything in her life, and now her father was asking her to go ask for everything. The ride to Dawson Ridge took 2 hours on horseback. 2 hours of nothing but Wyoming winter pressing down on her shoulders, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you. It talks to you, tells you to turn back, tells you that whatever waits at the end of this road isn't worth the frost biting at your cheeks and the ice forming in the folds of your coat collar. But Evelyn kept her eyes on the trail and her hands steady on the reins, and she let the cold talk all it wanted. She had stopped listening to things that tried to turn her back a long time ago. She was maybe 6 miles out from the ridge when she passed old Marcus Gentry, coming the other direction on his mule, and Marcus pulled up short the moment he recognized her, and his eyebrows went somewhere near his hat brim. "Evelyn Carter," he said, "where in the world are you headed in this weather?" "Dawson Ridge," she said simply. Emily was 27 now. She had heard that smirk in people's voices so many times that it had stopped making her angry and started making her tired. There was a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years proving something that should never have needed proving in the first place, and Emily carried that exhaustion the way she carried everything else quietly, without complaint, packed down somewhere underneath her sternum, where it didn't get in the way of the work. The work was what mattered. The work was the only thing she had ever trusted completely. She got to the garage at 6:15, and the first thing she noticed was that Marcus Webb had left the bay door unlatched again. What people said about Will Dawson was this, that he was the kind of man who didn't give second chances, who'd built Dawson Ridge from nothing, through sheer iron-backed will, and hadn't softened a day since. They said he'd called in 3 debts, last spring alone, and every single man who owed him had lost something land-livestock reputation. They said his word was law in 3 counties, and his silence was louder than most men's shouting. They said he'd loved his wife something fierce, and when she died 4 years ago, whatever warmth he'd carried died right alongside her, and what was left was all blade and no handle. Evelyn had heard all of it. She had decided to believe none of it until she saw it for herself. That was the thing about Evelyn Carter that most people in Hatcher's Creek didn't understand. She had always been deeply, almost stubbornly committed to forming her own opinions. Her mother had given her that. Her mother, who had grown up in a house full of gossip and learned early that the story a town tells about a person is almost never the full story, had sat Evelyn down when she was 9 years old and said, "Evie, people will always tell you who someone is before you've had a chance to find out yourself. Your job is to listen politely and then go find out." It was the most important lesson Margaret Carter ever taught her daughter. And Margaret Carter had taught her daughter quite a few important lessons before the fever took her. So Evelyn listened to what people said about William Dawson. And then she kept riding toward his ridge. She saw the gate first. Iron tall with the letters D and R twisted together at the top in a shape that was either artistry or intimidation, depending on how you looked at it. Beyond the gate, the road curved upward through bare-branched trees and disappeared around a hill, and on the other side of that hill, she knew was the main house. She had seen it once from a distance years ago. A large, solid house, not flashy, but serious. The kind of house that said the person inside it wasn't going anywhere. She stopped her horse in front of the gate. There was a man standing beside it, young, maybe 20, with a rifle resting across his arms in a way that was somewhere between casual and deliberate. He watched her approach without moving. "I'm here to see Mr. Dawson," Evelyn said. The young man looked her over in that way. People look you over when they've been told to look people over, assessing, calculating, not particularly friendly. "Mr. Dawson isn't expecting anyone today," he said. "I know he isn't. Tell him Evelyn Carter is here. Tell him I'm Thomas Carter's daughter. He'll know the name." Something crossed the young man's face at that recognition, and beneath the recognition, a faint trace of what might have been sympathy. He knew the name too then, which meant the story of her father's debt was already making its way through the hills, the way stories always do in small territories, faster than horses and colder than the wind. The young man said nothing for a moment. Then he turned and walked up the road toward the house, and Evelyn sat on her horse and waited, and did not fidget, and did not let herself think about what came next, because if she thought about what came next, she would think about all the things that could go wrong, and thinking about all the things that could go wrong was a luxury she couldn't afford today. She waited 15 minutes. Then the young man came back, and behind him came another man. Evelyn had braced herself for many things on the ride over. She had braced herself for coldness, for dismissal, for a man who would make her stand outside and state her business through a fence, like a petitioner before a throne. She had braced herself for condescension and impatience, and the particular kind of cruelty that comfortable men sometimes show to people who've come to ask them for something. She had not braced herself for William Dawson to open the gate himself and hold it open and say in a voice that was quieter than she'd expected, "Miss Carter, come in out of the cold." She studied him in the few seconds it took to dismount. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad through the shoulders with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that had been shaped by sun and wind and time into something that wasn't exactly handsome, but was deeply, unmistakably present. The kind of face that has been through things and arrived on the other side, still intact if changed. He was watching her with eyes that were gray-green and unreadable and not unkind. That last part surprised her. Not unkind. She had expected cold. She had expected hard. She had gotten those things. They were there, she could see them. They were structural parts of who this man was. But underneath them, there was something else she hadn't anticipated and didn't quite have a name for yet. She took her horse's reins and walked through the gate, and he closed it behind her and fell into step beside her, without asking if she wanted company on the walk up to the house. "Your father didn't come himself," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she said. "He couldn't." "Couldn't," he repeated, and she couldn't tell if he was turning the word over to examine it or if he was letting it stand for what it was. "He's not well," she said. "He hasn't been well since the mine deal collapsed. I think—" She paused, measuring her words carefully, because she had promised herself she would be honest today, but she also knew that there was honest, and then there was reckless, and the difference between them was precision. "I think he's been ashamed, and shame has a way of making men small. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth." William Dawson said nothing for several steps. "How far did you ride?" he asked. "About 2 hours." He glanced at her, then briefly something shifting in the set of his jaw. "In this weather?" "It needed to be done," she said simply. They reached the front of the house. He opened the door and held it, and she walked in ahead of him into a hallway that was warm and smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something faintly sweet she couldn't immediately identify, and she was glad of the warmth, but she kept her spine straight and her chin level, because the warmth was not a victory, and she was not here to be comfortable. He led her into a room off the main hallway, A study, she thought, or something close to it. There was a desk large enough to conduct business at 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the property. He gestured to one of the chairs, and she sat, and he took the one across from her and leaned back slightly and folded his hands on his knee and watched her with those gray-green eyes and waited. She reached into her coat and took out the letter. She put it on the edge of the desk between them. He looked at it but didn't reach for it. "What does it say?" he asked. "It says my father is sorry. It says he meant to repay the debt in full, and the mine collapse wasn't something he foresaw. It says—" She stopped, breathed. "It says a lot of things men say when they've run out of other things to say." William Dawson's eyes came up from the letter to her face. "But that's not what you're here to say." "No," she said. "Then say what you came to say, Miss Carter." So she did. She sat in that chair in William Dawson's study, with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and she said the truest thing she knew how to say, because she had ridden 2 hours in the cold, and she had not done that to deliver someone else's words. "My father borrowed money he thought he could repay," she said. "He entered into a deal he believed in. The deal went wrong in ways he didn't predict and couldn't control, but he made the choice to enter into it, and that choice has consequences, and those consequences are his to bear. I'm not here to argue that he was wronged or that the debt should be forgiven because of bad luck. Bad luck isn't a debt payment, and I know that." William Dawson said nothing, but she had his complete attention. She could feel it. The quality of his silence was different from the silence of a man waiting to dismiss you. It was the silence of a man actually listening, and Evelyn had been around enough people who weren't listening to know the difference. "What I am here to say," she continued, "is that my father is not a dishonest man. He is a man who failed, and there's a difference. He did not take your money intending to cheat you. He took it intending to build something, and it didn't build, and now he owes you what he cannot pay. I know you have options for how to handle that, and I'm not going to tell you which option to choose. That's not my place, and it's not why I wrote here." She paused. "I wrote here because it needed someone to look you in the face and tell you the truth about Thomas Carter instead of sending a letter. The letter was his. This is mine." The room was quiet. Outside, the wind pushed against the window. William Dawson looked at her for a long moment. There was something working behind his eyes. She could see it. Something complicated and slow-moving, like a current running deep below the surface of still water. "How old are you?" he asked. She blinked. 24. "You ride alone in the middle of winter to come speak honestly to a man most grown men won't look directly at," he said. "And you're 24 years old. Age doesn't have much to do with it," she said. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her and looked out over whatever he looked out over when he needed to think, and Evelyn sat in the chair and waited and didn't fidget and didn't rush him, because rushing was what you did when you were afraid, and she was not afraid. She was something else. She wasn't sure what to call it. Steady, maybe. Resolved. The way you feel when you've made peace with the worst possible outcome and decided to speak your truth anyway. "Your father owes me $1,100, William said, still facing the window. "In 3 years of fair repayment, that's approximately $31 a month. At his current means, which I've been informed are close to nothing, he could not make that payment in 10 years. "I know," Evelyn said. "So what are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing anything," she said. "I told you. I came to tell you the truth. What you do with the truth is your decision." He turned from the window then and looked at her, and something in his expression had shifted, not softened exactly, but changed the way iron changes when it goes into a fire, not weaker, but different, something new being revealed in it. "Most people who come into this room come to make a deal," he said. "I'm not most people," she said. "No," he said. "You're not." And then the door to the study opened. Neither of them had heard footsteps in the hallway, and the interruption was so sudden that Evelyn half rose from her chair before she caught herself. In the doorway stood a child, a girl maybe 8 or 9 with dark hair, and her uncle's gray-green eyes, and an expression on her face that was so carefully, deliberately blank It was the most heartbreaking thing Evelyn had seen all day, and she had already had a day full of heartbreaking things. Lily. William's voice changed when he said the name, not softer exactly, but careful, the way you're careful with something precious. The girl's eyes went from her uncle to Evelyn and back again. "Mrs. Henley says lunch is ready," she said in a voice so small it was nearly swallowed by the room. "Thank you," William said. "I'll be there shortly." The girl didn't move. Her eyes were on Evelyn now, studying her with that intense, unblinking focus that children have before they learn to pretend they're not looking. Evelyn looked back steadily, without the bright, performative smile that adults sometimes aim at children like a weapon. "Hello," Evelyn said simply. The girl looked at her for one more long moment. Then she turned and disappeared back into the hallway, her footsteps soft and quick on the wood. "My niece," William said behind her. "My brother's child. She's been with me for 2 years." "She seems serious," Evelyn said. "She used to be different," he said. "Before." He didn't say before what. He didn't need to. Evelyn had heard enough of the Dawson story to fill in the shape of what that word was holding. She turned back to face him. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I've said what I came to say. Whatever you decide about the debt, I hope you'll decide with the full picture. My father is a good man who made a bad mistake. He's not a villain. He's just a man." She picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair. "I should get back before the weather turns." "Have you eaten?" he said. She paused. "I beg your pardon. It's midday. You rode 2 hours. Have you eaten anything today?" She had not in fact eaten anything today. She had been too knotted up with nerves to eat before she left, and too focused on the road to think about it during the ride. But she was not about to say that, because accepting his hospitality felt like crossing a line she hadn't decided whether she wanted to cross. "I'm fine," she said. "That's not what I asked," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "Sit down, Miss Carter," he said. Not unkindly, not softly either, just plainly the way a person speaks when they mean exactly what they say and nothing more. "Have something to eat, then I'll have one of my men see you safely back to the road." She sat down, not because he had told her to, because she decided to, because she recognized in that moment that accepting a meal from a man didn't make her beholden to him, and refusing it out of misplaced pride didn't make her stronger. Her mother had told her that too. Know the difference between dignity and stubbornness. They wear the same coat, but they're not the same thing. The meal was eaten mostly in silence in the kitchen rather than the dining room, which she suspected was unusual. Mrs. Henley, the housekeeper, a short, solid woman with reddish-gray hair and the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been running a household longer than some people had been alive, set food in front of them both without commentary, and then busied herself at the counter with her back turned in a way that was either tactful or indifferent. Lily sat at the far end of the table. She had appeared there after they'd been seated, slipping in quietly and taking her place without speaking with a book open beside her plate that she divided her attention between and Evelyn with careful periodic glances that she seemed to hope were undetected. They were not undetected. Evelyn caught the third or fourth one directly, and instead of looking away, she offered the smallest possible smile. Not the big, bright, performative kind, just a small one, a real one, the kind you give to someone when you want them to know you see them. Lily looked immediately back at her book, but she didn't move her chair farther away. Halfway through the meal, William Dawson set down his fork and said, "Miss Carter, I want to ask you something and I'd like you to answer me honestly." "I've been answering you honestly since I got here," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one. "So you have," he said. "I want to ask you, what do you think should happen? Not what you're willing to accept, not what you came here to ask for. What do you actually think should happen with your father's debt?" She put her own fork down. She thought about it for a real moment. Not the polished, rehearsed answer, but the actual answer, the one she hadn't let herself say out loud yet, because it felt too presumptuous. "I think," she said slowly, "that if a man enters into a deal honestly, And the deal fails honestly, and he has made every effort to find a way to repay the debt and has genuinely truly run out of options. I think there's a version of justice in the world where that man is given more time or a reduced sum or something other than ruin. Not because he deserves to escape consequences, but because ruin doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't get you your money back. It doesn't make an example of anything useful. It just grinds a man into the dust and calls it justice, when really it's just... She stopped. It's just power, she said. And power and justice aren't the same thing even when they wear the same face. The kitchen was very quiet. Mrs. Henley had gone very still at the counter. Lily had stopped pretending to read her book. William Dawson looked at Evelyn Carter across the kitchen table in a way that she couldn't quite decipher. It was too layered, too many things happening at once in those gray-green eyes, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Miss Carter, how long have you been the one running your household?" She blinked. "Since I was 13, when my mother died. And your father?" "He did his best. He was better with the land than the books. I kept the books." "And since the collapse?" "Since the collapse, I've been keeping the books, keeping the house, tending the garden, managing what animals we have left, and trying to find other ways to bring in income while he..." She stopped again, chose her next words with care. "While he found his feet again." William nodded slowly. "And are you planning to go on doing that?" "For as long as it takes," she said. "He's my father." The words landed in the room and sat there, and Evelyn felt the truth of them even as she said them. Not the weight of obligation, but something older and more honest than that: the simple fact of loving someone and choosing to stand beside them even when standing beside them cost you things. Something crossed William Dawson's face. She couldn't name it, but it was real. "Excuse me," he said quietly, and he stood and he walked out of the kitchen. Evelyn sat at the table. Mrs. Henley moved quietly to clear a plate. Lily sat at the far end with her book not reading, watching Evelyn with those careful measuring eyes. "He's not bad," Lily said suddenly. Evelyn looked at her. "I know. Most people are scared of him." The girl said it without any particular judgment, just as information, the way children sometimes state things. "I know that too," Evelyn said. "You're not," Lily observed. Evelyn thought about that for a moment. "No," she said. "I'm not." Lily seemed to weigh this. "Why?" she asked. "Because scared is only useful when it helps you figure out what to do," Evelyn said. "Once you've figured out what to do, scared just gets in the way." She paused. "I figured out what to do before I got here, so I left the scared behind on the road." Lily stared at her. Then slowly, something happened to the careful blankness of the child's face. Not exactly a smile, but the possibility of one, the place where a smile might happen if it were given enough time and safety. She looked back at her book. But she had moved subtly slightly an inch or two closer to Evelyn's end of the table. William came back into the kitchen 15 minutes later. He had a different quality to him now, not lighter exactly, but settled like a man who has been having an argument with himself and has finally arrived at a position he can stand on. "Miss Carter," he said, "I'd like to make you a proposal." She looked at him steadily. "All right." "Not about the debt," he said. "Not only about the debt." She waited. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, and for a moment he just looked at the table, and she had the distinct impression that whatever he was about to say was something he had not said before, something he was saying for the first time, and that it was costing him something to say it. "I have a daughter's worth of empty rooms in this house," he said. "I have a ranch that runs itself adequately, but not well, because I've been too occupied being a one-man operation to notice the places it's bleeding. I have a niece who hasn't laughed in 2 years, and I have..." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I have been alone in a way that has become not comfortable but familiar, and those are not the same thing." Evelyn said nothing. "I need someone who can keep books," he said. "Someone who can run a household that actually functions instead of just exists. Someone who..." He glanced toward the end of the table where Lily had been sitting, and the girl was still there, still not reading, listening with her whole body. He looked back at Evelyn. Someone who won't flinch. Mr. Dawson, she said carefully. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing a marriage, he said. The word hit the air between them like a stone dropped into still water, clean heavy, sending rings outward in every direction. I know how that sounds, he said before she could speak. I know we have known each other for less than 3 hours. I know you came here about a debt, and I'm sitting here talking about something else entirely, and I know that is strange. I know it's strange. He looked at her directly, those gray-green eyes completely open now, in a way they hadn't been before. But you sat in my study and told me the truth when you could have told me what I wanted to hear. And that is not a small thing. That is, in my experience, a nearly impossible thing. And I am not a man who lets nearly impossible things walk out the door without at least— He stopped himself, set his jaw. Asking, he said. Simply. Evelyn looked at him across the kitchen table. She heard her mother's voice in the back of her mind, not specific words, just the tone of her, the quality of her, the way she had always faced the unexpected with open eyes instead of flinching away. What would a marriage look like? She asked. Practically. Specifically. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, she thought. The relief of a man who asked an impossible question and got a practical answer instead of a door in his face. The debt disappears, he said. Today completely. Your father is free of it. You would live here. You would have full authority over the household. Mrs. Henley answers to you. The books are yours. The running of the domestic operations of this ranch is in your hands. You would have your own room, your own privacy, your own time. You would be treated with complete respect by everyone on this property. He paused. And I would not be a poor companion, I think, if you gave me the chance to try. And what do you get? She said. The things I told you, he said. Someone who keeps the books. Someone who might— He looked at Lily again briefly. Someone who might help her find her way back. Evelyn followed his gaze to the little girl at the end of the table. Lily was watching her with those careful, measuring eyes, and in them Evelyn saw something she recognized, the look of a child who has learned to expect loss and is waiting with patient and practiced resignation to be disappointed again. That look hit her somewhere deep, somewhere below argument, below practicality, below all the sensible objections that were already lining up in her mind. She looked back at William Dawson. I have conditions, she said. He didn't blink. Tell me. 3, she said. First, I am a partner in this arrangement, not a servant. I run the household because I choose to, not because I'm obligated to. If something is wrong, I say so directly, and you hear it directly without going through other people or dismissing it. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Second, my father. He is not touched again, not by you, not by anyone connected to you. Whatever happened before today stays before today. You don't use the debt as leverage over him or over me now or ever. Agreed, he said. Same voice, same directness. Third, she said, and she paused here because this was the one that mattered most, the one that was hardest to say. You don't lie to me. About anything. About this ranch, about your life, about yourself. I can handle difficult truths. I cannot handle comfortable lies. If we are going to build something here, it will be built on what's real, or it will not be built at all. William Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand across the kitchen table. Agreed, he said. She looked at his hand. She thought about 19 miles of winter road and a letter she hadn't written, and a father who hadn't been able to face what he owed, and a little girl at the end of the table with emptiness in her eyes, and the particular quality of silence in this house that spoke of too many rooms with nobody in them. She thought about her mother saying, know the difference between dignity and stubbornness. She reached across the table and shook William Dawson's hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he shook it exactly once, the way men shake hands when they mean what they're agreeing to. All right, Evelyn Carter said. Lily made a sound at the end of the table. Not a word. Not quite a breath. Something in between the sound of a child who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time and has just in some small and almost imperceptible way loosened her grip. Neither adult looked at her directly, but both of them heard it. Outside, the Wyoming wind pushed against the kitchen window, and the fire in the hearth crackled and settled, and somewhere in the house a clock ticked steadily, the way clocks do, measuring time, marking the moment, keeping record of the instant when one thing ends and another begins, whether anyone is paying attention or not. Evelyn Carter was paying attention. She always had been. She sat at the table in William Dawson's kitchen, with her hand no longer in his, and she turned her eyes toward the window and the winter light coming through it, and she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to feel the enormity of what had just happened. 5 seconds of something large and unnamed moving through her chest. And then she folded it up neatly, the way you fold something precious you aren't ready to look at yet, and she turned back to the room. "Now," she said in a voice that was calm and steady and practical. "Tell me about these books you mentioned, and tell me where they've been going wrong." William Dawson blinked. Then for the first time, the very first time she'd seen it, the corner of his mouth moved into something that was unmistakably a smile. Small, brief, real. "All right," he said, and he got up to get the ledger. At the end of the table, Lily slowly closed her book, and she watched the two of them with eyes that were still careful, still measuring, still waiting, but in which something new had begun to stir. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something she didn't have a name for yet. But she would. She would find the name for it. Given enough time and enough of this woman who left the scared behind on the road. This woman who shook her uncle's hand across a kitchen table and asked for the ledger like she was ready to get to work. Given enough of this. Lily Dawson thought she might be able to find the name for it. She thought it might be something close to hope. The ledger was worse than she'd expected. Evelyn sat at the desk in William's study that evening. He had offered it to her without ceremony, simply set the books in front of her and said, "Take what time you need," and left her to it. And she went through the numbers the way her mother had taught her to go through numbers, slowly, carefully, without assuming you already knew what you were going to find. Because the thing about numbers was that they didn't lie. People lied. Circumstances complicated things. But numbers, stripped down to what they were always told the truth if you were willing to listen. What the numbers told her tonight made her set her pen down and press her fingers against her eyes and breathe. The ranch was profitable. That part was real. Dawson Ridge generated more income than most operations in 3 counties, and the core of it was solid built, well built to last. But around the edges of that solid core, something was leaking. Not dramatically, not in the way that announced itself as crisis, but steadily, quietly, the way a roof leaks before it collapses, a slow and patient drainage that if left alone would eventually hollow out even the strongest foundation. She found the first discrepancy in the feed accounts, then a second in the equipment maintenance records. By the time she reached the payroll section, she had found 4 separate places where the numbers didn't quite add up, where small amounts never large enough to be immediately alarming had been redirected in ways that didn't correspond to any documented expense. Someone was stealing from William Dawson. Not boldly, not stupidly. With patience and precision and the confidence of someone who believed they would never be caught because they had correctly calculated that William Dawson was a man who ran his ranch through force of personality and physical presence and sharp instinct, who trusted his people because he'd hired them himself, who was too occupied with the large-scale operation to scrutinize the small-scale details. It was a reasonable calculation. It had worked apparently for at least 2 years based on what she could see. It stopped working the night Evelyn Carter sat down with the ledger. She didn't go to William that night. She needed to be certain, absolutely certain, before she said anything because she understood instinctively that walking into a man's house and telling him that someone he trusted was betraying him was not a small thing. It was the kind of thing that needed to be done correctly or not at all. So she kept going through the books, page by page, building the picture, making her notes in the small, precise handwriting that had been keeping her father's accounts in order since she was 13 years old. She was still at the desk when she heard footsteps in the hallway, and William appeared in the doorway. He had his coat on, which meant he'd been out checking the property. She was learning already that he made a late round of the outbuildings every night before he slept, a habit so ingrained it was almost ritual. He saw the look on her face and stopped. "What did you find?" he said. No preamble. No softening. Just the direct question of a man who'd rather know the hard thing than be spared it. She had promised him honesty. I was asking for it now, without even knowing he was asking. She told him. She laid it out clearly and completely. The discrepancies, the amounts, the pattern of it, the careful, systematic nature that told her this wasn't carelessness, but intention. She showed him the pages, pointed to the numbers, walked him through the logic of it. The way her mother had walked her through logic step by step, so that at the end there was no room for doubt. William stood beside the desk and listened without interrupting. His face went through several things while she talked. First attention, then sharpening focus, then something harder and colder settling behind his eyes that she hadn't seen there before, or not quite like this. A concentrated anger that had the quality of something very controlled, which meant it was very deep. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. 2 years, he said. At least. It may go back further. I haven't finished. He pressed his hand flat on the desk, just for a moment. Then he straightened. Who? He said. I think I know, she said carefully. But I want to finish verifying before I say a name. If I'm wrong about someone you trust, and that matters. He looked at her. Most people, when they find something like this, either go to the person and confront them directly, or they bury it because they don't want the trouble. I know, she said. You're doing neither. I'm doing it correctly, she said. Give me until tomorrow morning. Something moved through his expression, not quite the smile she'd seen at the kitchen table, but adjacent to it, the same territory. All right, he said. Tomorrow morning. He was at the door when she said, Mr. Dawson. He turned. You should sleep, she said. You look like a man who's about to go have a conversation he's not ready for yet. Don't have it tonight. He looked at her for a moment. Is that advice? It's an observation, she said. Do with it what you like. He made a sound that was somewhere between a short laugh and something else, and then he walked out, and she heard his footsteps go down the hallway and up the stairs, and she turned back to the ledger and kept working. She finished at 2 a.m. She knew the name. The man was called Pete Griggs. He'd been with Dawson Ridge for 6 years, trusted enough to handle the smaller purchasing accounts, respected enough that no one questioned his records. He was a careful thief. Evelyn had to grant him that. He had structured the skimming to be nearly invisible, spread it across enough different accounts that catching it required seeing all of them together, which no one had ever done because the bookkeeping had been divided between 3 different people, none of whom had access to the full picture. She had the full picture now. She closed the ledger. She folded her hands on the desk. She looked at the far wall for a long moment and let herself feel the weight of what she'd found. Not dramatic, not self-congratulatory. Just the quiet, heavy knowledge of what this meant and what it was going to set in motion and what it was going to cost William when he heard the name, because Pete Griggs wasn't just an employee. She'd gathered that much from the way Mrs. Henley had mentioned him at dinner. The easy, familiar way. The way you mention someone who's been part of the landscape of a place for so long, they've become part of how the place understands itself. This was going to hurt. She had ridden 2 hours in the cold to do a hard thing. She had been here less than 24 hours, and she was already doing the next one. She went to bed. In the morning. William was already at the kitchen table when she came downstairs, and he had the look of a man who had either slept poorly or not at all. Mrs. Henley set coffee in front of both of them, without being asked, in the efficient, unceremonious way that told Evelyn the housekeeper had already intuited that something was happening, even if she didn't know what. Lily was not at the table. It was early, too early for the child who Evelyn had gathered, kept her own careful schedule, appearing and disappearing on a rhythm that was entirely her own. Pete Griggs, Evelyn said. She watched it land. She watched William's face process it, the name, the implication, the full meaning of it. He didn't react explosively. That wasn't how he was built. What happened instead was a stillness, a particular quality of stillness that was somehow worse than an explosion, because it took up more room pressed against more walls. You're certain, he said. Yes. Show me. She showed him. She took him through it the same way she'd walked through it in her own head, methodically, leaving nothing out, pointing to exactly what she'd found and where. He didn't interrupt. He looked at everything she showed him. His coffee went cold in the cup. When she finished, he sat back in the chair and looked at the table for a long moment. 6 years, he said. It wasn't quite the same as what he'd said last night, 2 years. This was deeper. This had the quality of something collapsing slowly at the foundation. Yes, she said, because there was nothing else to say. He was at my wife's funeral, William said, quietly. He was one of 4 men who helped carry. He stopped, set his jaw, looked at the window. He told me after that if I needed anything, I only had to ask. Evelyn was quiet. I trusted him, William said. I know. He stood up. He went to the window, the same thing he'd done yesterday in the study, and she recognized it now as something he did when he needed to think without being watched. When whatever was happening on his face was something he wasn't ready to let someone else see yet. She let him have it. She drank her coffee and waited, and she thought about what her mother used to say about grief and anger, and the way they sometimes arrive wearing each other's clothes, and she thought about the fact that William Dawson had come to this moment, not because of anything she had done wrong, but because she had done something right, and sometimes those were the hardest moments to navigate, because there was no one to be angry at, except the truth itself. I'll handle it today, he said finally. All right. It will. He stopped, turned back to her. It will cause disruption on the property. Some of the men are close to Pete. There may be questions about why I'm acting and how I know. She looked at him steadily. Tell them, she said. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. I may have to tell them it was you who found it. Then tell them that, she said simply. He looked at her. You understand that some of them won't like that. Some of them won't like it regardless of whether they know it was me, she said. A new person coming in, finding what they missed, catching what got past them for 6 years. They won't like that, whether they know my name or not. The only question is whether you and I are starting our arrangement with honesty or with convenience. She paused. I told you yesterday. I'll take honesty. William Dawson looked at Evelyn Carter across the kitchen of his house, and the look on his face was not gratitude exactly, though there was something of that in it, and it was not admiration exactly, though there was something of that too. It was something more complicated than either one. It was the look of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and someone has just for the first time put their hand on the other side of it. He nodded. Once. And then he put on his coat, and he went out to find Pete Griggs. What happened in the yard that morning was something Evelyn didn't witness directly, but heard about in pieces over the following days from Mrs. Henley, who delivered information in the dry, precise manner of a woman who had been observing events for decades and had long since stopped being surprised by them, and from some of the younger hands who were less practiced at keeping things to themselves. What she gathered was this, that William had found Pete Griggs in the equipment barn at mid-morning alone, and had closed the door behind them, and whatever had been said in that barn had lasted perhaps 20 minutes, and when the door opened again, William had walked out, and Pete Griggs had walked out behind him with a face that had the particular gray, emptied-out look of a man who has been caught doing what he thought he would never be caught doing. By noon, Pete Griggs was gone from Dawson Ridge. No scene. No drama. No public confrontation. Just his things cleared from the bunkhouse, his horse taken from the stable, his absence becoming real in the slow and wordless way that absences become real when something familiar suddenly isn't where it's supposed to be. Some of the men were confused. Some were angry. A few of them Evelyn suspected had known Pete well enough and long enough that they didn't want to believe what they were hearing, which was that Pete Griggs had been stealing from the man they worked for slowly and carefully and consistently for 6 years. That kind of news didn't go down easily. It rearranged things. It made you look at your own memory differently. Re-examine the things you thought you knew. Wonder what else you'd missed or misread or taken at face value when you shouldn't have. At dinner that evening, 3 of the senior hands came to the house and asked to speak to William. Evelyn was in the study when they arrived. She heard their voices in the hallway, the low, controlled, but unmistakably edged tones of men who wanted answers and were being careful about how they asked for them. She heard William's voice steady, and even giving the men what he'd said, he would give them the truth. She heard the specific moment when he said her name, when he said that it was the new Mrs. Dawson who had found the discrepancy, who had gone through the books and traced the pattern and brought it to him. She heard the silence that followed. And then one of the men she didn't know yet, which one she was still learning. Names said something she didn't quite catch in a tone that wasn't quiet enough to be respectful and wasn't loud enough to be openly hostile, somewhere in that narrow, uncomfortable band between the two. She heard William's response to it. He said, "Whatever you were about to say, don't." Just that. 4 words. But with a quality in them that told her, even from the study with the door half closed and the length of the hallway between them, that the conversation had just arrived at its final boundary and would not be going further in that direction. The men left. William came to the study doorway a few minutes later. "Well," she said without looking up from the notes she'd been making, "that went about how I expected." "How did you expect it to go?" he said. "They don't know me. I've been here less than a day. Pete Griggs was here 6 years. In their minds, they've lost someone they understood and gained someone they don't. That's uncomfortable, and uncomfortable men sometimes say uncomfortable things." She looked up. "It will pass. Or it won't. But either way, it's not the most important thing." He leaned in the doorway and looked at her with that expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of "open the way" his face looked when he wasn't actively being careful about what it showed. "What is the most important thing?" he asked. "That the books are right now," she said, "and that the ranch isn't bleeding anymore. The rest is noise." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He thought about it. "I'm not sure," he said. "I made you a proposal 24 hours ago based on one conversation. I think I expected someone softer, someone who would need more—" He paused, looking for the word. "Orienting." "I've been orienting myself since I was 13, she said. "I don't need much runway." He almost smiled. She was getting better at seeing it the way it started, that barely there movement at the corner of his mouth before he controlled it. "No," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." The first week passed in a rhythm that was unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. Evelyn learned the house, the way she'd always learned things, by paying attention, by watching how things moved and what rhythms they kept and where the friction was, because friction always told you where something wasn't working. She found the friction in the kitchen supply ordering, which had been done on an outdated system that consistently overordered certain staples and underordered others. She found it in the laundry management, which had 3 people doing what could be done more efficiently by 2, with better coordination. She found it in the weekly meal planning, which Mrs. Henley managed with great competence, but had never been coordinated with the work schedules of the ranch hands, meaning meals were often ready either too early or too late for the men coming in from the fields. She made changes carefully, not all at once, not in ways that announced themselves as changes she'd learned early, that the fastest way to make people resist a new system was to present it as a replacement for the old one. So she made adjustments, small ones, threading them into the existing operations quietly, and she watched to see what held. Mrs. Henley watched her in turn. The housekeeper was not an easy woman to read. She was efficient, experienced, genuinely skilled at what she did. And she had been running the Dawson household in her own way for long enough that the arrival of a new mistress of the house was. House was, Evelyn understood, not an uncomplicated thing. She hadn't pushed. She'd observed. She'd been respectful of what Mrs. Henley knew and how she knew it. And she'd waited. On the 4th day, Mrs. Henley came to the study while Evelyn was reviewing the supply accounts and said without preamble, "The meal timing system you suggested to Tom Rigby. He implemented it yesterday. The men came in on time. There were no complaints." "Good," Evelyn said simply. "I would have done it myself if I'd thought of it," Mrs. Henley said. "You were managing 10 other things," Evelyn said. "You can't think of everything." Mrs. Henley looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Dawson's wife used to rearrange everything at once and wonder why the staff were impossible." She paused. "You don't do that." "No," Evelyn said. "Why not?" "Because the goal is for things to work better," Evelyn said. "Not for things to look like I made them work better. There's a difference." Another pause. Longer. I'll have the full supply inventory ready for you by Thursday, Mrs. Henley said. And she left. Evelyn allowed herself a small breath of something that wasn't quite relief, but was adjacent to it. Mrs. Henley's cooperation wasn't going to be given easily or quickly, but it was going to be given. She was certain of that now. The harder work, the one she hadn't been able to make progress on in structured ways because it didn't respond to structure, was Lily. The little girl moved through the house in her careful, quiet orbit, appearing and disappearing, sometimes present at meals, and sometimes not always watching. She had not spoken directly to Evelyn again after that first exchange in the kitchen, the one about leaving the scared behind on the road. But she watched. She was always carefully, consistently watching. On the 5th day, Evelyn found the child sitting on the back step with a piece of rope, trying with a focused and increasingly frustrated attention to work out a knot that had clearly gotten away from her. She was not asking for help. She would not ask for help. That was evident in every line of her body, the set of her small shoulders, the determined press of her mouth. Evelyn sat down on the step beside her. Not close, not far. She didn't reach for the rope. That's a bowline knot that went wrong, she said conversationally. See where it crossed over itself twice instead of once? That's what's holding it. Lily didn't respond. If you work the left loop first counterclockwise, the right side will loosen enough to fix it, Evelyn said. Or you can keep working it the way you are. It'll take about 4 times as long, but it'll get there. Silence. Then, without a word, Lily shifted how she was working the rope. Left loop, counterclockwise. The knot gave. Lily stared at the rope in her hands for a moment. Where did you learn that? She said. It was the most words she'd voluntarily aimed at Evelyn since the first day. My father, Evelyn said. He grew up near the water. Sailor's knots. Lily turned the rope over in her hands. Can you show me another one? Sure, Evelyn said. They sat on the back step for an hour, working knots, and the conversation that grew up around the knot instruction was slow and tentative and arrived in pieces. Short questions, shorter answers, long silences that weren't uncomfortable, just careful. Lily was a child who moved toward things at her own pace, and any attempt to rush her would push her back, so Evelyn didn't rush. She answered what was asked. She offered what seemed useful. She let the silences be what they were. At the end of the hour, Lily stood up with the rope and looked at Evelyn with those careful eyes. You'll be here tomorrow, she said. Yes, Evelyn said. The child nodded, a small private nod, and went inside. Evelyn sat on the back step alone for a moment and felt something move through her quiet warmth, the feeling of a thread being slowly and carefully extended between two people. It wasn't trust yet. It was the beginning of the willingness to try trust, which was something, which was in fact more than something. It was on the 7th night that the first real fracture appeared. William had been quiet at dinner, not his usual quality of quiet, which was contained and deliberate, but a different kind, distracted, something working behind his eyes that he wasn't bringing to the surface. Evelyn had noticed, but hadn't pressed. After dinner, he'd gone to the study, and she'd given him an hour before she went to ask if he needed the accounts for anything. He was holding a letter. She could see from the doorway that it was not a new letter. It had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases had gone soft, the paper taking on the quality of something handled too much, held too often. He was sitting at the desk, looking at it, not reading it, looking at it, which were two different things. She said nothing. He looked up. Something crossed his face, an impulse to put the letter away, close it off, present the controlled surface again. She watched him have that impulse, and then slowly decide against it. It's from my wife, he said. The last letter she ever wrote to me. She wrote it. He stopped. She wrote it about 10 days before she died. She was visiting her sister in Colorado. She was going to come back the following week, and instead... He set the letter flat on the desk. It's a very ordinary letter, mostly about the weather there, and what her sister had been cooking, and something funny the neighbor's dog had done. Nothing important. He was quiet for a moment. I've read it probably 400 times. Evelyn came into the room. She sat down in the chair across from the desk. She didn't say anything because this was not a moment that needed words from her. I don't take it out often, he said. But sometimes it's a bad night." "What makes it a bad night?" she asked. Gently. He thought about it. "Usually something that reminds me of not her exactly. More the shape of what's gone. He stopped searching. The specific gravity of what used to be in this house that isn't anymore." He looked at Evelyn. "Tonight I walked past Lily's room and I heard her laughing. At something. I don't know what. But she was laughing, and it's been a very long time since I heard that, and it should have—" He stopped again. "It should have felt good," he said. "And it did. And it also felt—" He pressed his hand flat on the desk again, that gesture she'd come to recognize. "Like something I'd missed. Like a year of somethings I'd missed." Evelyn looked at him. "You didn't miss all of it," she said. "You were here. You stayed. You kept showing up every day in a house that must have felt wrong without her in it. And you kept taking care of Lily and running this property and not disappearing into yourself, which is what a lot of men do when they lose what you lost." She paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." William looked at her. Something in his expression did something she hadn't seen before. Not the almost smile, something more than that. Something rawer. Something he was allowing through the surface that usually didn't get through. Just for a moment. Just long enough to be real. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Say the exact thing," he said. "The specific thing. Not the comfortable thing, not the polished thing. The exact right one." She considered it. "I think it's because I'm not trying to make you feel better," she said. "I'm just trying to tell you the truth. And the truth sometimes is also the thing that helps. Those two things overlap more than people expect." He looked at the letter on the desk. Then slowly, he folded it back along its worn creases and set it in the drawer. He closed the drawer. "Thank you," he said. She stood up. "Get some sleep," she said. "The North Fence crew is coming in early tomorrow, and you said you wanted to meet them before they start." He almost laughed. The sound of its surprised short reel landed in the room in a way that changed something. The way a shift in light changes a room, even though nothing physical has moved. "I did say that," he agreed. She was at the door when he said Evelyn. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She turned. "I want you to know," he said. And he said it carefully, with the deliberate precision of a man who does not make statements. "He doesn't mean that I did not make yesterday's proposal carelessly. I know it must have seemed sudden. I know from the outside it must have looked like a transaction. But it wasn't. Or it wasn't only that." He paused. "I don't have a more elegant way to say this. I just want you to know." Evelyn stood in the doorway and looked at him. "I know," she said. She meant it. She went down the hallway to her room, and she lay in the dark, and she listened to the house settle around her. The sounds of it. The creaks and sighs of a building that had been standing through Wyoming winters for 20 years. The occasional distant sound of the wind working against the eaves, and she thought about the shape of what she was inside now. This life that she had walked into from a very cold road, carrying someone else's letter, and had somehow ended up here. In this room. In this house. With a man she had known for a week who held his dead wife's letters on bad nights, and a child who laughed at something unknown in her bedroom, and was slowly beginning to open a door she had kept very firmly shut. She had not expected any of this. But then she pressed her hand flat against the blanket, and thought of William doing the same thing against the desk, and almost laughed at the echo of it. She had not expected a lot of things that had turned out to matter. Outside, a coyote called somewhere far off on the ridge. Inside, the house was quiet and warm and dark, and Evelyn Carter lay in it and breathed, and somewhere down the hall, Lily Dawson had stopped laughing and gone to sleep. And in his room at the far end of the house, William Dawson was either sleeping or staring at the ceiling, and none of them knew yet what the next day would ask of them, what the next week would demand, what old things were already moving toward them from the past that hadn't finished with any of them yet. But they were in the same house. For the first time in a long time, all three of them were in the same house, and none of them were alone in it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the beginning of everything. 3 weeks into her life at Dawson Ridge, Evelyn made a discovery that had nothing to do with the ledger. She found it by accident. The way most important things get found, not by looking, but by being in the right place at the right moment with your eyes open. She had gone to the storage room off the kitchen to find an extra blanket for Lily, who had come to dinner complaining of cold hands and refusing in the stubborn, dignified way that was becoming familiar to say directly that she was uncomfortable. Evelyn had learned to listen to what Lily didn't say as much as what she did. The child communicated in the gaps between words, in the small physical signals that most adults had stopped paying attention to a particular stillness. A too casual look away, the way she held her own elbows when something was bothering her. Cold hands meant cold room. Cold room meant something wasn't right with the heating in that part of the house. Evelyn went to find a blanket, and instead found pushed behind a stack of folded quilts on the highest shelf. A wooden box about the size of a hat box with a small brass latch and a layer of dust on the lid that told her it hadn't been touched in a long time. She didn't open it. She stood there for a moment, her hand near it, but not on it, and then she took the blanket she'd come for and left the box exactly where it was, and she brought the blanket to Lily's room and knocked on the door and said through it, "I found an extra blanket, leaving it on the floor outside your door." And she heard the small sound of movement inside, and she walked away, and that was that. But the box stayed in her mind. It stayed there through dinner, and through the evening accounts, and through the conversation she had with William afterward about the North Pasture grazing schedule, and it was still there when she was lying in the dark, trying to sleep. She could not have said exactly why it occupied her the way it did, except that there were some objects in the world that have a quality of significance that has nothing to do with what they contain. A weight that comes from having been set aside with care, hidden with intention, preserved against discovery. Someone had put that box on that shelf and pushed it behind those quilts, and the dust on the lid meant it had been there a long time. And something in Evelyn understood that the box was not forgotten, but protected. She asked Mrs. Henley about it the next morning, carefully, obliquely mentioning the storage room and the reorganization she was planning, and noting that the upper shelves had some items that might need sorting. Mrs. Henley's hands went very still on the pot she was drying. "The upper shelves can wait," she said. "Of course," Evelyn said, and said nothing more. But she watched Mrs. Henley's face for the rest of the morning, and she saw the careful deliberateness of a woman who knew exactly what was on those shelves, and had decided a long time ago that some things were better left where they were. It was Lily who told her, not intentionally, not directly. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days after the knot lesson on the back step, during what had quietly become their daily hour, sometimes longer, occasionally shorter, always outside, if the weather permitted, always involving something physical, because Lily learned best and opened up most when her hands were busy. They had moved through knots to basic leather work to this week, caring for the horses, specifically Lily's horse, a patient roan named Chester, who tolerated Lily's sometimes over-enthusiastic brushing with the saintly resignation of an animal that has made peace with being loved imperfectly. They were in the middle of Chester's brushing when Lily said without preamble, the way she said most things when she decided to say them, "There's a box in the storage room." Evelyn kept brushing her section of the horse's flank. "Is there? It has my mother's things in it," Lily said. Evelyn's hand slowed but didn't stop. "Your mother," she said, carefully. "She was my father's sister," Lily said. "She and my father, they died in the same accident. The river flooded. They were crossing and the—" She stopped. Her hands had gone still on Chester's neck. "Uncle Will took me in. The box has her things in it, the things that came with me when I came here." Evelyn said nothing for a moment. She kept brushing slow and even giving the child whatever time she needed. "I put it up there," Lily said. "I asked Mrs. Henley to help me put it up there. It was too heavy for me." "Why up there?" Evelyn asked, gently. "Because I didn't want to look at it," Lily said. "But I didn't want it to be gone either." She was quiet for a moment, and the silence had a particular texture to it, dense and careful. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "That makes perfect sense." Lily looked at her. "Uncle Will doesn't know it's up there. He thinks the things got sent back to my grandmother's." Evelyn absorbed this. "Does your grandmother know where the things are?" No, Lily said. She doesn't ask. Said flatly, with the particular flat quality that children use to describe facts that have long since stopped being surprising and become simply true. Grandmother doesn't ask. This is the world as it is. Accept it. Evelyn finished Chester's flank. She set the brush down. She turned to look at Lily properly fully the way she'd learned the child actually wanted to be looked at. Not with the soft, pitying gaze that adults sometimes used with grieving children, which Lily found intolerable, but directly clearly as an equal. You don't have to do anything with that box, she said. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever if you don't want to. It'll be right where you put it. Lily looked at the horse. I think about it sometimes, she said. I think about what's in it. I can't remember everything that got put in there. I was 6. You were 6 when you lost them. Almost 7, Lily said, with a precision that children have about ages, that particular exactness that matters so much when you're young. 7 in 2 more weeks. 7 in 2 more weeks, Evelyn repeated. Not as if she'd forgotten she hadn't known, but as if she was marking it, letting it matter, because it did matter. Lily's birthday was in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, Lily would turn 9, and she would do it in a house that contained a box of her mother's things that no one knew about, and an uncle who was trying his best, and a woman who had appeared from nowhere 19 miles away, and was still trying to figure out what she could offer. I'll think about what I want to do, Lily said, decisively. The conversation was over. She picked up Chester's brush again and resumed with focused, deliberate attention. Evelyn watched her for a moment. Then she picked up her own brush and did the same. She told William that night. Not everything. Not the details of the conversation. Not the things Lily had said in the particular way she'd said them. Those belonged to Lily. But she told him about the box, told him that Lily had mentioned a birthday coming, and watched his face move through things quickly. A sequence she could read better than she could have 2 weeks ago. Recognition, and behind it, something heavier. Guilt, perhaps, or the particular version of pain that comes from realizing you've been so occupied with surviving that you've let something important slide past you unnoticed. Her birthday, he said. He stopped, pressed his hand on the desk. I haven't the last 2 years. The days have been... He stopped again, and she could see that he was angry at himself. The tight, controlled anger of a person who holds themselves to a standard and has just discovered they've fallen short of it. She didn't tell me it was coming, he said. She hasn't mentioned it. She wouldn't, Evelyn said. Not the way she is right now. Because she doesn't want to ask for something, he said. He said it with the weight of a man who has just understood something and doesn't like what he understands. Because she's spent 2 years learning not to need things, Evelyn said. Or at least learning not to show it. Because needing things and not getting them is its own kind of pain, and at some point she decided the first pain was more bearable than the second. William was very quiet. I know that particular calculation, he said after a moment. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I know you do, she said. He looked back at her. What do we do, he said. And the we of it was not accidental. She heard it land, felt its weight, the simple, significant fact of a man who had spent 4 years navigating everything alone, saying we without qualifying it. We find out what she'd actually want, Evelyn said. Not what's easiest to give her, what she actually wants, which was easier to say than to do. Given that Lily was a child who had refined the art of not revealing what she wanted into something approaching mastery. But Evelyn was patient. She had learned to be patient through 11 years of running a household and managing her father's slow, difficult grief, and she brought that patience to bear on the small, careful work of drawing Lily out. She didn't ask directly. She watched. She listened. She paid attention to what Lily's eyes went to when she thought no one was looking. And 3 days before the birthday, she had what she needed. What she needed was this: Lily wanted a horse of her own. Not Chester, who was technically hers to use, but belonged to the ranch. Her own horse, chosen by her, belonging to her, no one else's. She'd mentioned it twice in passing over the previous week in the careful offhand way that children mention things they want, but don't expect to get. Dropping the words into conversation and then moving quickly on not giving them room to become a request, because a request could be refused, and an offhand comment couldn't. Evelyn went to William. She laid it out simply. The birthday. The horse. What it would mean to the child, not just the animal itself, but the thing underneath it. The thing that a 9-year-old who had lost everything couldn't quite articulate, but clearly felt that something in this world was hers. That she had put a claim on something and the world had honored it. That she mattered enough for the mattering to be made concrete. William listened. He nodded. Then he said, "I know which horse." There was a young mare, not yet 2 years old, gentle-natured and curious, who'd been born on the ranch the previous spring and hadn't been assigned any working purpose yet. She was bay-colored with a white star on her forehead, and she had a habit of following anyone who came near her paddock with a focus that was almost conversational, as if she was tracking the discussion and planning to weigh in. "Lily's been visiting that mare every day for 6 weeks, William said. "I didn't connect it until just now." Evelyn looked at him. "Lily's been choosing her own horse for 6 weeks, she said. She just didn't know we were listening." William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you see all of it?" "Because I look," she said simply. "And because I was also a child who wanted things I didn't know how to ask for. I recognized the shape of it." I didn't say anything to that. But he held it. She could see him holding it, turning it over, understanding something new about who she was and what she'd come from. And something in his expression shifted in a way she was beginning to recognize as his particular form of paying attention. The birthday arrived on a Thursday. It arrived with snow. Not the brutal winter snow of the early season, but a lighter, cleaner fall, the kind that made the world look like it had been newly made. The house smelled of whatever Mrs. Henley for. Lily came downstairs with the careful, neutral face that Evelyn recognized as the armor she wore when she was trying not to expect anything, so that she couldn't be disappointed. She made it as far as the kitchen doorway. Then she stopped. The table had been set differently, not elaborately, not in a way that announced itself with excessive ceremony, because Evelyn knew that would make Lily retreat, would feel too much like performance, too much like something that required a response she wasn't ready to give. Just warmly. Just in a way that said, "Today is a day that matters, and we know it matters, and you don't have to pretend it doesn't." Mrs. Henley was at the counter with a stack of pancakes. William was at the table, which was unusual enough on its own. He was typically out before first light on working days. He looked up when Lily appeared in the doorway. "Happy birthday," he said. And his voice had something in it that wasn't his usual controlled steadiness. Something more open, the particular openness of a man who has decided to let something be visible that he normally keeps private. Lily stood in the doorway and looked at him and at the table, and at Mrs. Henley with her pancakes, and something happened to her face that Evelyn, standing to the side, had been privately hoping for since the night she arrived. The armor cracked. Not dramatically, not in a way that was anything but small and real. But the careful blankness gave way just around the eyes to something unguarded. Something young. Something that was unmistakably a child on her birthday who had been surprised by kindness. She sat down at the table. She ate her pancakes. She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. The silence she kept over breakfast was not her usual careful silence. It was a different kind. A fuller kind. The silence of someone who is busy feeling something rather than busy protecting themselves from feeling it. After breakfast, William said, "Come with me." He took her outside. Evelyn followed at a slight distance, far enough to be out of the way, close enough to see. They went to the paddock where the young bay mare was waiting with her usual focused curiosity, pressing her nose against the fence rail and watching their approach with alert, interested eyes. William opened the paddock gate. He handed Lily a halter. He said, "She's yours. She's been yours. We just needed to make it official." Lily stood very still for a long moment. Then she walked into the paddock. The mare came to meet her halfway, that particular mare, with her conversational manner, her habit of following people, her 6 weeks of daily visits from a small, quiet girl who came to stand at the fence every morning and say nothing but stay until she had to leave, came to meet Lily halfway and pressed her nose into the child's chest with the gentle, deliberate care of an animal that has chosen its person and is performing a kind of confirmation. Lily put her arms around the mare's neck, and she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, in the way that children cry when the thing they've been holding very tightly, finally gets to be put down, quiet and deep, the kind of crying that cleans something out rather than adding to it. William stood at the paddock fence and watched his niece cry into a horse's neck, and he was very still, and Evelyn stood beside him, and she was still too, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say, because some moments are not for words, they are just for witnessing. After a while, Lily looked up. She looked at William. Her face was wet, her eyes red, and the careful blankness was entirely gone, and what was underneath it was just a child, just a 9-year-old girl, just Lily. "Thank you, Uncle Will," she said. And William Dawson, who Evelyn had watched over 3 weeks manage cattle disputes, and employee confrontations, and ledger discrepancies, and his own private grief, all with the same iron self-possession, visibly and completely lost that self-possession for approximately 4 seconds. His jaw moved. He looked at the sky. He looked back at his niece. "Happy birthday, Lily," he said, and his voice was rough with it. Evelyn turned slightly away to give him the moment, but she felt it. She felt the shape of it, what was shifting in that paddock, what was being built, or rebuilt, or perhaps built for the first time properly. And she felt the way it touched the edges of something in herself, some part of her that had also been held tightly for a long time, carefully with both hands, because she hadn't known yet that there was a place safe enough to put it down. She was thinking about that, about the held tightly thing, about the putting down, when she heard the sound of an approaching horse on the main road. She turned. The rider came through the gate at a pace that wasn't hurried, but had a quality of purpose to it, a direction, and as he came closer, she could see that he wasn't one of the ranch hands she knew most of them now, by sight, by posture, by the particular way each of them sat a horse. This man was unknown to her. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed for a man on horseback, with the kind of face that had been shaped by calculations rather than weather. William turned at the sound of the approaching horse. She watched something happen to him. Something instant and unambiguous. His posture changed, not physically, not in any way that an observer would immediately identify, but Evelyn was close enough to see it, the way his shoulders set differently, the way his face rearranged itself into a particular configuration she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not quite. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting. "Stay with Lily," he said, quietly, to Evelyn. He said it without looking at her, his eyes already on the approaching rider, and the way he said it was not a command. He didn't speak to her. In commands, she had noticed that even in moments of stress, he always spoke to her in something else, something that acknowledged her choice in the matter. But it was urgent, and she heard the urgency. She went back into the paddock. Lily had looked up at the approaching rider too, and her face had done something, gone very still again, but differently. Not the chosen blankness of self-protection, but something else. Something involuntary. Something that told Evelyn the child recognized the man, and the recognition was not pleasant. "Who is that?" Evelyn said quietly. Lily looked at her. "His name is Harlan Sykes," she said. "He used to come here before, when Uncle Will was, when things were bad." She paused. "I don't like him." Evelyn filed that. She kept her hand near the mare's neck, steady, a point of calm, and she watched through the paddock fence as William reached the visitor, and they exchanged words she couldn't hear at that distance. But she could read the body language. William's controlled tension, the other man's too easy posture, the way Harlan Sykes sat his horse with the settled comfort of a man who believes he has the advantage and is enjoying the fact. She didn't like what she was seeing. The conversation was short, no more than 5 minutes. Then Sykes touched his hat brim, a gesture that managed to be simultaneously polite and dismissive, and turned his horse and rode back out through the gate. William watched him go. Then he stood very still for a long moment, his back to the paddock, his back to her. "Can you take Lily inside?" he said, without turning. "Yes," she said. She got Lily out of the paddock, gently filling the transition with talk about the mare name's possibilities. What Lily was going to call her, a conversation deliberately light and forward-looking, to give the child something to think about other than what she'd just seen. Lily allowed herself to be redirected, though Evelyn could tell she was tracking William with the peripheral awareness of a child who has learned to read adult tension as an early warning system. They were inside. Lily installed at the kitchen table with Mrs. Henley and a piece of birthday cake. The baking smell from that morning revealed at last when William came in. He came directly to the study. Evelyn followed him. She closed the door. He was standing at the desk. He hadn't sat. He was looking at the surface of the desk, the way he looked at things when he was thinking through something he didn't like the shape of. "Tell me," she said. He looked up at her, and she saw something she hadn't seen on his face in 3 weeks of learning to read him, something that was underneath the control, very close to afraid. "His name is Harlan Sykes," he said. "He owns the land that borders mine to the east. About 6 years ago, when the territory was being surveyed for the new county lines, there was a dispute about where the boundary between our properties actually fell. We settled it through the county commissioner's office. The boundary was established, documented, filed. I thought it was done." "Apparently it's not done," Evelyn said. "Apparently." He said, "Sykes has gotten hold of a document. He says a document, I don't know what he actually has, that calls the original survey into question. He's claiming that the county commissioner who handled it had a financial interest in the outcome, and that the survey was deliberately falsified in my favor." He paused. "He's claiming 20 acres of my eastern grazing land is legally his, and he's moving to file in the county court." "What's on those 20 acres?" Evelyn asked. He looked at her steadily. "The primary water access for my cattle operation," he said. "Spring-fed runs year-round. Without that access, I have to reroute the entire eastern herd, or pay for alternative watering, which changes everything," she said. "Which changes everything," he agreed. They looked at each other across the desk. "Is there any truth to it?" she said. "The claim about the commissioner." A lesser man might have been offended by the question. William simply said, "I don't know. I didn't know the commissioner personally. The process was handled by my lawyer at the time. I trusted the outcome because it was official and documented, and I had no reason to doubt it." "Who was your lawyer?" "A man named Aldrin Cross. He retired 2 years ago, moved to Denver." "The original documents, do you have them?" "All of them. The survey, the county filing, the correspondence. In that cabinet," he said, pointing. She crossed to it. She opened it. She looked at the organized rows of folders. She had reorganized them herself 2 weeks ago, which meant she knew exactly where things were, and she found the property documentation file and pulled it. She took it to the desk. She sat down. She began to read. William stood across from her and watched her work, and for a moment the room was quiet, except for the sound of papers moving and the clock on the mantel marking seconds. "Evelyn," he said. She kept reading. "Sykes isn't a man who makes moves like this without having thought them through," he said. "If he came here today, if he's willing to go to the county court, it means he believes he can win, which means he has something." "Maybe," she said. "Or it means," he continued, and his voice was careful and quiet, and she could hear what was underneath it. The thing he was working toward saying, that he has information about someone, about something that could be used as leverage, that Sykes has always operated not outside the law exactly, but adjacent to it, using what he knows about people, what he can threaten. Evelyn stopped reading. She looked up. "He mentioned my father," William said. The air in the room changed. "What about your father?" she said. "He mentioned a partnership my father had with the county commissioner, years ago. Before my time here, my father built this ranch. I inherited it at 22 when he died. I don't know the full history of every deal my father made." He paused. "Sykes implied that if I tried to fight the survey claim, certain information about my father's dealings with the commissioner might become public." Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, and she felt the architecture of it taking shape, the structure of what Sykes was actually doing, which was not a legal dispute, but a threat. A pressure campaign designed to make William back down rather than fight, because fighting meant things coming to light that Sykes was betting William would prefer to keep in the dark. "He doesn't know you very well," she said. William looked at her. "What?" He's betting that you value your father's reputation more than your water access, she said. He's betting that the threat of public embarrassment will make you settle. He's read you as the kind of man who protects his family name above everything. She set the documents down. Is he right? Silence. No, William said. Then we're going to find out what he actually has, she said. And we're going to find out what the original survey actually says. And we're going to do it before he files anything in county court, because once it's filed, the terms of the fight change. He looked at her. We, he said. The same weight the word had carried the night they'd talked about Lily's birthday. We, she confirmed. She was already looking back at the documents. Do you have the name of the surveyor? Not the commissioner, the man who actually did the physical survey? It should be in the file. I see it, she said. Jacob Prentice. Is he still in the area? Last I knew, he's still in Hatcher's Creek, runs the land office on Cedar Street. She looked up. Then that's where we start. William Dawson stood across the desk from his wife of 3 weeks and looked at her, at the documents spread in front of her, at the focused precision of her attention, at the complete and unself-conscious confidence with which she had absorbed his crisis and converted it into a plan of action. And his expression was not the almost smile she'd seen in the kitchen, not the rawer thing she'd seen when he talked about his wife's letter. It was something else. Something that had no near relatives in the expressions she'd catalogued over 3 weeks. Something that she wasn't sure he himself was fully aware of showing. She filed it. She didn't look at it directly, because that wasn't the moment for looking at it directly. But she filed it. I'll ride to town tomorrow, she said. First thing, I'll talk to Prentice. I'll come with you. No, she said. You'll stay and manage the property. If Sykes is watching and he's watching, he wants to see disruption. He wants to see the operation thrown off while we chase this. You run the property exactly as normal. I'll handle Prentice. William was quiet for a moment. You rode 19 miles through a Wyoming winter to tell me the truth about your father, he said slowly. And now you're riding to town to fight a legal battle for property you've known about for 3 weeks. She looked at him steadily. You said it yourself the day I arrived, she said. I'm not most people. His jaw moved. Something in him shifted and settled the way she'd seen it shift and settle before, but deeper this time, more final, a man landing on solid ground after a long time without it. No, he said. You're not. She closed the document file and stood. Get some sleep, she said, already moving toward the door. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She was in the hallway when she heard him say behind her, quiet enough that it was almost to himself, What did I do to deserve you walking through my gate? She paused. She didn't turn back. She let it sit there in the hallway between them. The question, the weight of it, the particular quality of wonder in it that she recognized because she had felt something similar herself, lying in the dark in those first nights, listening to the house settle, asking the same kind of question in a different direction. She didn't answer it. Some things didn't need answering. She went down the hallway to her room, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she allowed herself for the first time to feel the full scale of what had been built in 3 weeks inside the walls of this house. Not a transaction, not an arrangement. Something that had begun as both of those things and had become without anyone deciding it would, without anyone naming it or claiming it something else. Something real. Something that was going to be tested. She knew that she could feel the pressure of it already. Harlan Sykes, and whatever he was carrying, and whatever history he dug up, and whatever he planned to do with it. She had ridden into this life carrying someone else's burden, and now she was going to ride into town to fight for something that was hers. Hers. She tested the word in her mind. 3 weeks, and it already fit. Down the hall. She heard Lily laugh at something. A short, surprised sound. The kind of laugh that happens before you can decide not to. And then the sound of William's voice, low and warm, saying something she couldn't hear. And then Lily laughing again. Evelyn pressed her hand flat on the blanket beside her. She thought of William doing the same thing on the desk. She thought of how the gesture had moved between them without either of them planning it, the way things move between people when they've started to share a language without noticing they were learning it. She breathed. She thought about Jacob Prentice and the county filing, and what a man like Harlan Sykes would need to have in his possession to feel confident enough to ride up to William Dawson's gate and make a threat to his face. And beneath all of that, steadier than all of that, she thought about the shape of what she was fighting for. Not a ranch, not water rights, a home, her home. And she had not ridden 19 miles through a Wyoming winter and shaken a man's hand across a kitchen table to let someone take that from her. Tomorrow, she would ride to town, and Harlan Sykes, whoever he was and whatever he had, was about to find out what happened. And when you threatened something that Evelyn Carter had decided to protect. She left before the sun was fully up. William was already in the yard when she brought her horse out. She hadn't expected that, had assumed he would be in the north pasture or the equipment barn where he usually started his mornings. But he was there standing in the cold with his coat buttoned and his hat pulled low, and he had her horse's saddle already checked, and the cinch tightened in the way she'd learned was his version of saying things he hadn't found words for yet. She didn't comment on it. She swung up into the saddle and gathered the reins and looked down at him. "I'll be back by mid-afternoon," she said. "If Prentice gives you trouble," he started. "He won't," she said, not arrogantly, just with the flat confidence of a woman who had learned a long time ago that most men who seemed like trouble weren't, and most situations that seemed impossible weren't either, if you walked into them with your eyes open and your voice steady. William looked at her for a moment. The winter light was still thin and gray, and it caught the side of his face in a way that made him look older and younger at the same time. Older because of the lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting into Wyoming sun, and wind younger because of what was in his expression right now. Something unguarded. Something that had not learned yet to protect itself fully from whatever was happening between them. "Be careful," he said. "Always," she said. She rode out through the gate. Jacob Prentice had run the land office in Hatcher's Creek for going on 20 years, which meant he had been there before William's father died, and William took the ranch before the county lines were redrawn, before any of the disputes that had grown up around those redrawn lines. He was a small, precise man, the kind of man who kept his desk in a particular order that reflected the particular order of his mind, meticulous, documented, unwilling to guess when he could measure. Evelyn had learned about him from two sources: the property file, which contained his name and his survey notes, and Mrs. Henley, who had the area's accumulated social history in her head, the way a library has books organized and retrievable if you knew how to ask. According to Mrs. Henley, Jacob Prentice was a man of complete and almost aggressive integrity. He had refused 2 bribes in his career at the land office, both times publicly, both times with consequences for the people who'd attempted it. He was not liked by people who preferred their land arrangements kept flexible. He was respected by everyone else. Evelyn rode to his office and tied her horse and went inside. Prentice looked up from his desk when she entered. He was perhaps 60, with sharp eyes behind wire-framed spectacles, and the composed manner of a man who spent his days managing information, and had learned to treat every new piece of it with the same careful neutrality. "Can I help you?" he said. "My name is Evelyn Dawson," she said. It was the first time she'd used the name in public, and she noticed the small internal shift of it, not performed, just real, the way a new thing settles when you finally hold it up to the light. "I'm William Dawson's wife. I'm here about a property survey from 8 years ago, the Dawson Ridge eastern boundary." Something moved in Prentice's expression. Not surprise exactly. Something more like the look of a man who has been waiting for a particular subject to arrive on his doorstep and is noting that it has finally gotten there. "Sit down, Mrs. Dawson," he said. She sat. "You're here because of Harlan Sykes," he said. "Yes," she said. "What do you know about what he's claiming?" Prentice removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a careful, deliberate motion. He set them back on. He looked at her with the full assessing attention of a man who is deciding how much to say and to whom. "I know what he's claiming because he was in this office 3 weeks ago," Prentice said. "Before he rode out to Dawson Ridge, apparently. He came to me first." Evelyn kept her face neutral. "What did he want?" "I wanted me to confirm that the original survey of the eastern boundary had been conducted incorrectly. He had documents, copies of documents he claimed suggesting that Commissioner Aldred Hayes, who oversaw the boundary filing 8 years ago, had a financial arrangement with William's father. He wanted me to say officially that the survey outcome was compromised. And? Prentice looked at her steadily. I told him I would not say anything officially without reviewing all original documentation. I told him that my own survey notes from that boundary assessment were complete, precise, and conducted without any instruction from Commissioner Hayes or anyone else. I told him that if he wanted to challenge the survey in county court, he was welcome to do so, but he should be prepared for the court to request my original notes as evidence, and that my notes would say exactly what they said 8 years ago. Evelyn breathed slowly. So the survey itself is clean. My portion of it is completely clean, Prentice said. The physical measurements, the markers, the documentation, all of it is exactly what the law required and exactly what I recorded. He paused. What Commissioner Hayes did with that information afterward. What arrangements he may or may not have had with the Dawson family. That is a different question, and one I genuinely cannot answer, because it was outside my knowledge at the time. Evelyn processed that. But even if Hayes had an arrangement, even if there was something improper in how the filing was managed, the underlying survey data is accurate. Correct, Prentice said. The land is where I said it was. The boundary is where I marked it. No arrangement between Hayes and anyone else changes the physical location of the earth. She looked at him. Will you say that in court if it comes to it? He looked back at her with the calm certainty of a man who had spent 20 years being asked questions he already knew the answers to. I have said nothing else my entire career, Mrs. Dawson. I don't intend to start now. She stood. She extended her hand. He shook it firmly the way her father used to shake hands with people he respected, with both the grip and the eye contact. One more thing, she said. The document Sykes claims to have, the ones suggesting an arrangement between Hayes and William's father. Do you know if they're real? Prentice was quiet for a moment. I don't know if they're real, he said carefully. But I know that Harlan Sykes has wanted that eastern grazing land for 15 years. I know he made an offer for it to William's father before the survey was conducted and was refused. And I know that a man who wants something badly enough for 15 years and is willing to wait. He paused. Sometimes such a man finds what he needs, and sometimes he makes what he needs. And the difference between those two things is very hard to prove. Evelyn stood very still. You're telling me the documents might be fabricated, she said. I'm telling you I don't know, he said. But I'm also telling you that the strongest defense against fabricated documents is real ones. And I have the real ones. Every measurement, every marker, every note from every day of that survey. Dated, signed, witnessed. If Sykes has manufactured something, it will have to hold up against what I actually recorded. And I recorded everything. She thanked him. She went back to her horse. She sat in the saddle for a moment before she turned toward home, her mind moving through what she'd learned, arranging it, the way she arranged ledger entries in order in relationship to each other, building toward the full picture. Prentice was clean. The survey was clean. Sykes had documents that might or might not be real. The court fight, if it came to that, would come down to the weight of real documentation against whatever Sykes had manufactured or found. And on that front, she thought of Prentice's 20 years of meticulous records. They were not unarmed. But something was still pulling at her. Something Prentice had said, and something he hadn't said. The arrangement between Hayes and William's father. Even if the documents were fabricated, the implication would damage something. A county court proceeding that put the Dawson name next to the word corruption, even without proof, even with full exoneration at the end, that was a weapon in itself. She knew how small territories worked. She had grown up in one. The verdict people remembered was the one they heard first. And the verdict they heard first was never the legal one, but the social one. The story that moved through town before the facts did. Sykes wasn't just trying to win in court. He was trying to make the cost of fighting high enough that William would rather give up 20 acres than survive the proceeding. She turned her horse toward home. She was 3 miles out from Dawson Ridge when she passed Marcus Gentry going the other direction. Again the old man and his patient mule, who seemed to occupy the same stretch of road at the same hour every week with the dedication of a natural phenomenon. Miss Evelyn, he said. He'd taken to calling her that in the weeks since her marriage, a compromise between formality and the familiarity he'd had with her before she became a Dawson. Headed back from town. Yes, she said. He looked at her with those small, sharp eyes that had seen most of what had happened in this part of Wyoming for 50 years. Heard Harlan Sykes paid a call on Dawson Ridge yesterday, he said. She looked at him steadily. Where did you hear that? Same place I hear everything, he said. The feed store, then the post office, then old Ruth at the pharmacy, who sees most things worth seeing from that window of hers. He paused. People are talking, Evelyn. What are they saying? That Sykes has got something on William, that there might be a court case, that the eastern grazing land might change hands. He looked at her. And some people are saying, he stopped. Say it, Marcus. Some people are saying that if Dawson Ridge goes under trouble right now, it's because Will brought a stranger in too fast, married too quick, didn't know what he was doing, and now he's paying for it. He said it without cruelty, just plainly the way he'd told her things all her life. I'm not saying I believe it, I'm saying it's being said. Evelyn sat her horse and let that land. She knew what he was really telling her. He was telling her that Sykes's strategy was broader than she'd realized, that alongside the court filing, there was a social campaign already running a story being planted in the community that would make William's judgment look compromised, that would frame her presence at the ranch as a liability rather than an asset. That would, if it took hold, isolate them both before the fight even properly started. Thank you, Marcus, she said. You going to be all right, he said. She looked at him. I'm going to be considerably better than all right, she said, and she rode on. William was waiting in the study when she got back. She came in with her coat still on and went straight to the desk and sat down and told him everything. Prentice the survey notes, the fabricated or found documents question, and then the harder thing, the thing Marcus had told her on the road. William listened without moving. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. He's running it on 2 tracks, William said. Yes, the legal track and the social track. The legal track he might lose. The social track. She paused. The social track he might win, regardless of what happens in court, if we let him run it unopposed. How do you oppose a rumor? You don't oppose it directly, she said. You replace it. You give people a different story, a truer one before the false one sets like concrete. She looked at him. People need to see you. See us. Not hiding, not scrambling, present. Confident. Running this ranch exactly as it's always been run, plus better. William leaned back in his chair. You're talking about appearances. I'm talking about reality, she said. The ranch is doing well. The books are clean. The operation is sound. Those are facts. Right now, Sykes is hoping that people will believe the story instead of the facts. Our job is to make the facts louder than the story. He looked at her for a moment. You've thought about this before, he said. Not just today. You already understood this kind of pressure. She was quiet for a moment. My father, she said simply. When his deal collapsed, the social damage came before the financial damage. People stopped trusting him before they knew the full story. And once people stop trusting you in a community like this one, the practical losses follow the social ones, like night follows day. She looked at William directly. I watched what happened when a man didn't fight it. I'm not going to let that happen to you. Something in William's face moved. Moved through several things quickly, and then settled into something she hadn't seen before. Not the open rawness of the bad night conversation about his wife's letter. Not the paddock emotion of watching Lily cry. Something different. Quieter. More fundamental. The look of a man who is seeing someone clearly fully, and finding that what he sees is exactly what he needed without knowing until this moment that he needed it. Evelyn, he said. She waited. He stood up. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her, not close, not presumptuous, just in front of her. And he looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen on the first day, with those gray-green eyes completely open. No surface, nothing held back. I need to tell you something, he said. All right, she said. When I asked you to marry me, he said carefully, I told you the things I needed. Someone to run the house. Someone for Lily. Someone... He stopped, pressed his lips together. Someone to stop being alone. Those things were all true, but they were also insufficient. She looked at him steadily, waiting. "What I didn't say," he continued, "because I didn't know how to say it, because I had not said anything like it in 4 years, and I wasn't certain I still knew how." He paused. "I didn't say that the reason I asked you specifically was not because you were available, or because you were willing, or because you happened to be in my study that morning. It was because you sat across from me and told me the truth when you could have told me anything else. And something in me—" He stopped again. "Something in me recognized that, not as a useful quality, as something more than that." The room was very quiet. "William," she said, "I'm not asking you to—" He paused. "I'm not putting a demand on it. I just need you to know that what I feel about the fact that you're here is not gratitude. Or not only gratitude, it's something that doesn't have a clean name yet, but it's real, and I didn't want to keep not saying it while we're walking into a fight together." Evelyn looked at him. She thought about 3 weeks of early mornings and late nights and ledger entries and birthday horses and conversations in the dark and the particular way he said her name when he meant something by it, which was different from the way he said it when he was just using it. She thought about the held tightly thing she'd felt on her first nights in the house, the thing she hadn't put down yet because she hadn't been sure there was safe ground to put it on. She thought the ground might be safe. "I know," she said. And then because she was Evelyn Carter and she had promised him honesty and she intended to keep that promise. "It's not only gratitude on my side either," he breathed. Something in his shoulders released that she hadn't realized he'd been holding. "All right," he said, quietly. "All right," she agreed. They stood in the study for a moment, in the particular silence of people who have just said true things and are letting the truth settle around them before the next thing starts. Then Evelyn picked up the property file from the desk. "We need to contact your lawyer," she said. "Not Cross, he's in Denver, a current one, today if possible." "There's a man named Samuel Hart in town," William said. "He handled a grazing dispute for me last year. He's good. Send word to him this afternoon," she said. "And the town meeting, when is the next one?" William looked at her. "First Friday of the month, 2 weeks. We go," she said. "Both of us. We let people see us. We answer questions directly whatever comes. No hiding, no managing the story from a distance. You want to walk into a room full of people who've been hearing Sykes's version for a week and I want to walk into a room full of people and be exactly what we are," she said, "which is a family that runs a clean operation and has nothing to hide. The best defense against a lie is a person standing in front of you telling the truth. I've been doing that since I walked into your study, and it seems to have worked reasonably well so far." The corner of his mouth moved. "It has," he agreed. The next 2 weeks were the fastest and the hardest she'd known since arriving at Dawson Ridge. Samuel Hart came out to the ranch the following morning, a compact, sharp-minded man in his early 40s who had the useful quality of listening twice as much as he spoke and speaking only when he had something worth saying. He reviewed the property documentation that Evelyn had already organized, asked the precise questions of a man who had argued boundary cases before, and confirmed what Prentice had told her: the survey itself was unimpeachable. The vulnerability. If there was one lay in the Hayes connection and the question of what Sykes actually had versus what he was claiming to have. "I need to see his documents," Hart said. "Whatever he's filing with the court, we request full discovery the moment he files. He can't hide what he has if he's using it as evidence." "And if he's fabricated something?" Evelyn asked. "Then we compare it to the originals," Hart said. "Fabricated documents have a way of not surviving that comparison. Paper ages. Ink behaves in particular ways. A man who puts together false documentation is betting that no one has the real thing to hold it up against." He looked at the organized file in front of him, Evelyn's work, clearly the precise arrangement of it. "You have the real thing." "We do," Evelyn said. Hart glanced between her and William with the measured expression of a man who had learned not to show surprise, but who was privately noting something. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "how long have you been managing this documentation?" 3 weeks, she said. He looked at the file again. Then he looked at William. "You should have hired her 8 years ago. he said entirely without humor. William said nothing. But Evelyn caught the flicker of something at the corner of his mouth, and she looked at her own hands on the desk to keep from smiling. The days between Hart's visit and the town meeting were full and relentless. Evelyn kept the books and managed the house and worked through the property documentation in the evenings, looking for anything else that might be relevant. Any additional paper that supported their position or complicated it, because she believed in knowing the worst-case version of your own story before someone else told it for you. She found nothing alarming. The records were clean, the operation sound, and the more she went through it, the more confident she was that what Sykes had, if he had anything real, was peripheral at best. But she also knew that peripheral could be enough if it was deployed in front of the right audience at the right moment. She rode to town twice more in those 2 weeks. Once to see Prentice again to understand exactly what his original survey notes contained and what their legal standing was. Once to speak with 2 women she'd identified through Mrs. Henley women who were well connected in the community, respected, whose opinions carried weight in the particular social architecture of Hatcher's Creek. She didn't go to them to lobby for William, not exactly. She went to them the way she went everywhere, with honesty. She answered their questions directly. She didn't pretend there was no challenge, and she told them clearly what the facts of the property situation were and what the Dawson operation actually looked like from the inside. Both women had expected to find someone defensive, possibly frightened, possibly in over her head. What they found was Evelyn. The second woman, a formidable widow named Clara Beaumont, who had run her own property for 15 years after her husband died and had opinions about most things, including the proper relationship between truth and reputation, looked at Evelyn at the end of their conversation and said, "I heard you came to Dawson Ridge to beg for your father's debt." "I came to tell William Dawson the truth about my father's debt," Evelyn said. "There's a difference." Clara Beaumont looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "there is." She picked up her coffee cup. "Harlan Sykes has been maneuvering in this county for 30 years, and he has always won by choosing opponents who were either too proud or too scared to stand up in public and simply tell the truth." She looked at Evelyn steadily. "He hasn't run across you before." "No," Evelyn said. "He hasn't." The town meeting was on a Friday evening in the community hall, which was full, unusually full. Evelyn judged because word had gotten around that the Dawson business might come up, and people who wanted to be part of whatever happened next had made sure to be there. She and William arrived together on time without hurry, which was itself a statement of a kind. They knew the moment they walked in that Sykes was there. She felt it before she saw him, a particular quality of attention in the room that shifted when they entered the way. A room shifts when the thing everyone has been waiting for walks through the door. She found him with her eyes after a few seconds across the room near the front, with 2 men she didn't recognize on either side of him, and an expression of composed confidence that told her he'd expected tonight to be easy. He hadn't expected her to walk in the room looking like that. She knew what she looked like because she had thought about it carefully. Not elaborately dressed, not trying to impress, that would have been wrong, would have felt false, and would have read as false. But clean and composed and present with the specific quality of ease that only comes when you have decided before you walked in that nothing in the room can touch you because you are standing on solid ground and you know it. William's hand found the small of her back briefly as they moved through the crowd, not possessively, just a point of contact, a physical statement of alignment, and then they separated slightly to greet people, because that was also part of it, being in the room, not as a fortress of 2, but as people who belonged to the community and moved through it naturally. She watched him. She had gotten good at watching him, the way he talked to the ranch hands in town, the men who came to shake his hand and ask how the operation was running. The way he answered directly and warmly, and without any edge of the defensive tension that Sykes was probably hoping to see. He was good at this, she realized. Not because he performed it, but because it was real. His relationship with this community, his investment in it was real, and real things were visible, even when you weren't trying to show them. The formal part of the meeting began. General business, first water allocation schedules, road maintenance discussions. The ordinary careful management of a community that had to function through a Wyoming winter. Evelyn sat beside William and listened and said nothing and watched the room. Sykes waited until the general business was almost done. Then he stood up. "I'd like to raise a matter of property," he said. His voice was measured and reasonable, a man with a concern rather than a grievance. "Concerning the eastern boundary of Dawson Ridge." The room shifted. People who had been paying partial attention began paying full attention. William didn't move. Sykes laid out his claim. He did it cleanly, professionally, without overplaying it. He was experienced at this. She could see had done it before in different rooms, with different stakes, knew how to make a challenge sound like a reasonable question rather than an attack. He mentioned the county commissioner. He mentioned the financial arrangement. He mentioned the documents he had obtained that raised concerns about the integrity of the original survey and filing. He used the word integrity twice. He said he wasn't making accusations, he was raising questions. He said he was simply asking that the matter be reviewed properly. He sat down. The room was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Evelyn stood up. She didn't look at William before she stood. She didn't need to. She felt him go still beside her, not with alarm, but with attention. The particular quality of attention he gave her when she was about to do something he hadn't anticipated. She looked at Sykes first, then at the room. "My name is Evelyn Dawson," she said. "I've been managing the accounts and documentation of Dawson Ridge for the past 3 weeks. She paused, giving that a moment to settle. "I've spent those 3 weeks going through every document in that property file, every survey note, every county filing, every piece of correspondence related to that eastern boundary. I've met with Jacob Prentice, who conducted the original survey, and I've reviewed his original field notes." She looked around the room steadily. "The survey is accurate. The boundary is exactly where Prentice marked it 8 years ago. The physical measurements are documented, dated, witnessed, and held at the land office, where anyone in this room is welcome to request them." The room was very quiet. She looked at Sykes. "As for the documents Mr. Sykes says he has, we welcome him to file them in county court. We welcome the court's review of all documentation, ours and his side by side, because that is exactly the kind of scrutiny that real documents survive and fabricated ones don't." She heard the intake of breath in the room at the word fabricated. She had chosen it deliberately. Not accusation statement. Flat and clear and without apology. Sykes's composure cracked. Just slightly. Just at the edges, a tightening around his eyes, a shift in the set of his mouth. The look of a man who had calculated his opponent's moves and found that the actual move was not on his list. "That's a serious implication, Mrs. Dawson," he said. "It's a serious situation," she said. "You came to my husband's ranch and made a claim that calls his integrity into question. You came here tonight and made that claim in public. I'm responding in public with the documentation we have. If your documents are real, they'll survive comparison. If they don't survive comparison..." She let the room fill in the rest of that sentence. "The court will determine what that means." She sat down. The room was not quiet anymore. It was that particular kind of charged sound, the sound of people processing something, reorienting, the low murmur of people turning to the person next to them and saying what they're thinking before they've fully decided what they think. William's hand found hers under the edge of the table. I didn't look at her. He was looking at the room, reading it the way he always read things, carefully, thoroughly, without rushing to a conclusion. But his hand found hers and held it, and she felt the steadiness of his grip, and she held it back. From across the room, Clara Beaumont caught Evelyn's eye. The older woman gave a single small nod. The kind of nod that means well done. Sykes did not stay for the rest of the meeting. He left with his 2 men shortly after Evelyn sat down, and the leaving itself said something. A man who had expected to plant doubt and had instead found it redirected back at him, a man who needed to regroup before he made another move. She watched him go without expression. But she felt something, not triumph, because triumph was for when the fight was actually over, and the fight was not over, not by a long distance. What she felt was something more like clarity. The confirmation that she had read the situation correctly and positioned them correctly, and that the next moves, whatever they were, would be made from solid ground. Hart found them after the meeting. He was smiling in the contained way of a lawyer who has seen something go the way he wanted it to, and is professional enough not to celebrate out loud. "He'll file within the week," he said. Tonight pushed him. He needs to make the next move before you make yours. But filing means we get discovery. Discovery means we see what he actually has. He looked at Evelyn. That was well done, Mrs. Dawson. We haven't won anything yet, she said. No, he agreed. But the ground is different than it was this morning. They rode home through the cold night, she and William side by side on the road. The sky was clear, and the stars were the particular sharp brightness of winter stars over open country, and the horses moved at an easy pace, and neither of them spoke for a while, comfortable in the silence, the way you're only comfortable in silences with people you know well enough to not need to fill them. You said fabricated, William said eventually. Yes, she said. You weren't certain. No, she said. I'm not certain, but I am certain that the word needed to be said out loud in that room tonight. Sykes's strategy depends on the accusation being implicit on people absorbing the doubt without anyone naming the alternative. Name the alternative, and you change the conversation. He was quiet for a moment. You learned that from your father, he said. What happened to him? What you watched? Yes, she said. I'm sorry, he said, that you had to learn it that way. She thought about her father, about Thomas Carter sitting at his kitchen table with his trembling hands and his letter. He couldn't deliver himself, and about the long, difficult year she'd spent holding things together while he found his way back to himself, and about the fact that everything she'd learned in that hard year had led her down a winter road to a man who held it open for her and asked her to come in out of the cold. I'm not sorry, she said. Not anymore. He looked at her in the dark. She looked back. Evelyn, he said. The particular way he said it when he meant something by it. I know, she said. They rode on through the cold and the starlight, and the horses found the familiar road home without being guided. And behind them, the lights of Hatcher's Creek grew smaller, and ahead of them, the lights of Dawson Ridge grew larger, warm and steady in the dark, and neither of them said anything more because nothing more needed to be said tonight. They had done what they'd come to do. The rest would come when it came, and they would meet it the same way they'd met everything else in the 3.5 weeks since a girl had ridden through a gate on a winter morning, with someone else's letter in her pocket and her own truth in her chest, together with their eyes open, standing on ground they had built and intended to keep. Sykes filed on a Tuesday. Hart sent word to the ranch by mid-morning, and Evelyn was in the study reviewing the grazing rotation accounts when the message arrived. She read it once, set it on the desk, picked it up and read it again, not because she hadn't understood it the first time, but because she wanted to feel the full weight of it before she carried it anywhere else. He had filed, which meant it was real now, which meant the next 3 weeks would determine whether everything she and William had built in the past month would hold under the kind of pressure that exposed the difference between things that looked solid and things that actually were. She went to find William. How was in the equipment barn, working alongside 2 of the hands on a harness repair that needed doing before the afternoon's work. He looked up when she came in, and he read her face before she said a word. She had noticed this about him, that he had learned to read her, the way she read him, in the particular rapid way of people who have been paying close attention to each other, and the knowledge that he could do it moved through her briefly and warmly before she set it aside, because this was not the moment for warmth. He filed, she said. William set down the harness. He said to the men, "Give us a minute," and they moved off without comment in the efficient way of ranch hands who understood the difference between their business and the boss's. Hart, William said, sent word this morning. He wants us in town tomorrow to review what was submitted. She paused. He says the documents Sykes filed include a letter, allegedly from your father to Commissioner Hayes, discussing the survey outcome before it was conducted. William was very still. That letter, Evelyn said carefully, watching him. Would that be possible? Is it something your father might actually have written? Howe was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet she'd learned to read as processing rather than evasion. He didn't evade, not with her. She had enough evidence of that to trust it completely now. He was thinking. My father, he said finally, was a man who believed that relationships mattered more than rules. He was not a dishonest man, but he was. He stopped. He was a man who thought that knowing the right people and maintaining those relationships was simply how the world worked. He would not have seen a letter to Hayes as corruption. He would have seen it as correspondence, as keeping a line of communication open. But the letter might exist, she said. I don't know, he said. I don't know what my father wrote to whom in the years before I took the ranch. I inherited the land and the operation and the reputation. I didn't inherit his full history. She nodded slowly. This was the thing she had been afraid of since the night Sykes had first ridden through the gate. Not that Sykes had fabricated everything, but that he had found something real and built something false around it. A real letter, taken out of context, used to suggest meaning. It had never carried supporting a claim. The letter itself had never been intended to support. That was harder to fight than pure fabrication. Pure fabrication cracked under comparison. A real document misread that required a different kind of argument. We go to Hart tomorrow, she said. And we look at everything. Whatever the letter says, we read it exactly as it is, not as what Sykes is claiming it means, as what it actually says. And if it says something that's hard to explain, he said, then we explain it, she said. Honestly, directly, the way we've done everything else. She looked at him steadily. William, we have Prentice. We have 6 weeks of my work on those books proving this operation is clean. We have Clara Beaumont and half the women's committee who watched me stand up in that town hall and name what Sykes was doing. We are not standing alone in this room. She paused. Trust the foundation. He looked at her. Something in him settled the same settling she'd seen on the night they'd talked about his father's documents, a man finding his footing again after a moment of uncertain ground. I trust the foundation, he said. And he meant more than the documents. She knew he did. They rode to town the next morning, both of them this time, and they went to Hart's office, and they sat down, and Hart put the filed documents on the table between them, and they read every word. The letter existed. That part was real. It was dated 7 months before the survey was conducted, written in a hand that William confirmed after a long moment of looking at it was his father's. It was a single page, and it was, as William had predicted, exactly the kind of correspondence a man wrote when he considered a county commissioner a professional acquaintance and wanted to maintain that acquaintance. It discussed ranching conditions, mentioned the upcoming boundary survey in passing, and expressed in a sentence that Sykes had underlined in his filing that William's father looked forward to a resolution that would allow Dawson Ridge to continue growing in the eastern direction. One sentence, underlined. Evelyn read that sentence 4 times. Then she said, "This is the whole case." Hart looked at her. The whole case rests on the interpretation of that sentence, yes. He's claiming it's a statement of desired outcome communicated to the commissioner before the survey, she said. He's arguing that Hayes then ensured the survey supported that outcome. Correct, Hart said. But the sentence doesn't say that, Evelyn said. It says his father hoped for a resolution that would allow continued growth. That's not an instruction. That's not an arrangement. That's a man expressing optimism about a business matter to someone he knew professionally. Any rancher in the territory could have written that sentence to anyone they knew in county government. That's our argument, Hart agreed. The question is whether it's sufficient. It's sufficient when you put it next to Prentice, she said. She was already reaching for the property file. Because what Sykes needs the court to believe is that Hayes directed Prentice to falsify the survey results. But Prentice kept every note, every physical measurement, every marker placement, dated and witnessed on the days they were taken in the field in the order they were taken. She looked up. You cannot instruct a man to falsify something and have him produce 20 days of consecutive internally consistent independently witnessed field notes that all support the same outcome. The documentation isn't consistent with fabrication. It's consistent with an accurate survey that happened to produce the result the rancher was hoping for because the land was actually where it was. The room was quiet. Hart leaned back slowly in his chair. He looked at Evelyn the way he'd looked at her at the town meeting that contained professional appreciation of a man who has seen something go right. Mrs. Dawson, he said, I'd like you to write that argument down exactly as you just said it. Exactly, word for word. Why? She said. Because I'm going to put it in front of the judge verbatim, he said. And because no jury in Wyoming is going to hear a woman explain that plainly and clearly, why a man's survey notes mean what they mean, and then decide she's wrong. William said nothing. But Evelyn felt him looking at her, the weight of it, the particular quality of attention he gave her that she had learned to recognize as its own kind of statement. She wrote it down. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, Evelyn did not slow down. She finished the quarterly accounts. She reorganized the storage schedule for the winter feed supply. She had 2 more conversations with Clara Beaumont, and one with the county sheriff, who had known William's father and had his own clear opinions about what the man had been and what he hadn't been. She kept working on the house, on the books, on Lily, on every thread of the life she was building inside the walls of Dawson Ridge, because she had learned, had always known really, but was living it now in a way that made the knowledge bone deep, that the best argument for who you are is what you keep doing when things are difficult. You don't prove your character in the easy moments. You prove it in the weeks before the hearing. Lily knew something was happening. She was 9 years old, and she had 2 years of practice reading Adult Anxiety, and she tracked the energy in the house with the precision of a child who had learned that changes in the air around adults frequently preceded changes in her own life. She didn't ask directly, but she appeared more frequently in the kitchen while Evelyn was working. She came to the study in the evenings and sat in the corner chair with her book, not reading mostly, but present as if proximity was its own form of reassurance. On the night before the hearing, she came to find Evelyn while Evelyn was still at the desk. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown with her bare feet on the cold floor, and she said, "Are we going to lose the ranch?" Evelyn looked up. She closed the account book in front of her. She gave Lily her full attention, the complete, undivided kind, because this was a child asking a real question, and real questions deserved real answers. "No," she said. "How do you know?" Lily said. "Because we have the truth on our side," Evelyn said. "And the truth is documented. And documented truth is very hard to argue against when you put it in front of people who are looking for it." She paused. "I won't it's impossible to lose. I won't lie to you. But I will tell you that I have done everything I know how to do to make sure we don't, and your uncle has, and Mr. Hart has. We are not going into that room unprepared." Lily looked at her. "You're not scared?" she said. The same observation she'd made on the very first day, almost 6 weeks ago now, on the back step with Chester. "I did my scared before I got here," Evelyn said. Same answer she'd given then. "I don't have room for it now." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed the room and did something she had never done before. She walked to Evelyn's chair, and she put her arms around Evelyn's shoulders from behind. Quickly, the way children hug when they've decided to do it before they can change their mind. And she held on for exactly 4 seconds, and then she let go and stepped back. "Okay," she said, as if something had been confirmed, as if a question she'd been carrying for 6 weeks had just been answered. She went back to her room. Evelyn sat at the desk with her hand pressed flat on the closed account book, and she breathed carefully, and she did not cry, because there would be time for that later. And tonight, she needed to finish reviewing Hart's opening argument, but she let herself feel it, the full weight of it. What that 4-second hug contained, what it represented, how far it was from the child who had stood in the doorway of the study on the first day, with carefully blank eyes, and disappeared before anyone could need anything from her. She felt it. She filed it. She opened the account book and kept working. The morning of the hearing, William came to the kitchen earlier than usual. Evelyn was already there. They ate breakfast together in a silence that was not tense, but focused. The silence of 2 people about to do something that matters, conserving their energy for where it's needed. Mrs. Henley fed them both without comment. She had a quality on that morning that Evelyn had not seen in her before, a particular deliberateness in everything she did. The way she set the plates, the way she poured the coffee, as if the precision of small things was her form of contribution to what was about to happen. Lily came down and ate quickly, and then looked at William across the table. "Win?" she said. William looked at her. "Okay," he said. She nodded. She went back upstairs to get ready for the school morning, and William watched her go, and Evelyn watched him watch her, and the 3 of them carried the weight of the morning without collapsing under it. They rode to town. The county courthouse was a solid wooden building that smelled of old paper and beeswax and the particular density of accumulated official proceedings, the smell of a place where things got decided. Hart was waiting for them outside. He looked at them both, then at the building, then back. "Ready," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. They went in. Sykes was already there with his own lawyer, a man from Cheyenne who had the polished, expensive quality of someone brought in specifically for this, which told Evelyn that Sykes had spent real money on this fight, and therefore believed he could win it. She noted that. She noted also that Sykes looked at William when they entered the room with the assessing gaze of a man who expected to see worry and was checking to confirm it. His gaze moved to Evelyn next. And there just briefly something shifted in his expression. The same thing she'd seen at the town meeting. The recalibration of a man whose list of expected moves doesn't include the one that's happening. The judge was a heavy-set man named Calloway, who had the blunt, business-like manner of someone who had spent 15 years cutting through arguments to the factual core underneath them, and had very little patience for anything that wasn't the factual core. He opened the proceedings. He let Sykes's lawyer present first. The presentation was polished. The letter was introduced as evidence. The argument was made exactly as Evelyn had anticipated, that the letter demonstrated prior communication of desired outcome between the property owner and the commissioner, that this compromised the integrity of the survey process, that the resulting boundary was therefore invalid. It was organized, professionally delivered, and built around a central image of impropriety that it worked very hard to make feel inevitable. When it was done, Judge Calloway looked at Hart. Hart stood up. He presented Prentice first. Prentice walked to the front of the room with his original field notes, and he answered Hart's questions in the dry, precise way. He answered everything. And the picture that emerged from 20 minutes of testimony was this: that the survey had been conducted over 20 consecutive days, that every measurement had been taken independently, that every result had been recorded in the field in the surveyor's own hand, and that the resulting boundary placement was exactly where the physical land demanded it be. Judge Calloway examined the field notes. He asked 3 questions. Prentice answered all 3 without hesitation. Then Hart presented the argument that Evelyn had written down in his office 3 weeks ago. Presented it verbatim as he'd said he would. She sat beside William and listened to her own words in Hart's voice, and she felt the clarity of them, not pride, just clarity, the satisfaction of a thing stated true. Sykes's lawyer objected twice. Calloway overruled both times. Then he asked to see the letter again. He read it, took his time with it, the whole thing, not just the underlined sentence. He set it down. He looked at Sykes's lawyer. "Counsel," he said, "this letter expresses hope. It does not direct action. It does not request a specific outcome from the commissioner. It does not offer compensation or benefit. It is a letter from a rancher to a professional acquaintance expressing optimism about a pending survey. Is there anything else in evidence that establishes an actual arrangement between these 2 parties?" Sykes's lawyer said there was not. Calloway looked at the field notes again. Then he looked at Sykes. "Mr. Sykes," he said, "you have brought this court a letter expressing hope and a survey conducted over 20 documented days by a man whose professional record is without blemish. You're asking me to find that the hope invalidates the survey." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to find that." The room was absolutely still. "The eastern boundary of Dawson Ridge," Calloway said, "stands as surveyed and filed. The motion is denied. Court cost to the petitioner." He closed the proceedings. The sound that came from the room, not loud but real, the released breath of everyone present who had been holding something, was something Evelyn felt in her chest before she processed it consciously. She felt William beside her go very still for exactly 1 second, and then he exhaled. One long, controlled breath. The sound of a man who has been carrying something very heavy and has just been allowed to set it down. She put her hand on his arm. He covered her hand with his. They sat like that for a moment, while the room moved around them, people standing. Hart gathering his documents, Sykes leaving with his Cheyenne lawyer without looking at either of them, and she registered that exit, the particular quality of it. The walk of a man who has deployed his best resource and found it insufficient and needs to go somewhere private to recalculate. He had wanted the land for 15 years. He would not have it. Hart came to them. Both shook their hands. said the necessary professional things that translated loosely to "we won," and it was because of the preparation which translated further to it was because of her. He said it more directly than that. Actually, he looked at Evelyn and said, "The argument you wrote changed the shape of this case. Calloway was going to read that letter, and he needed something to read it through. You gave him the frame." He paused. "Good work, Mrs. Dawson." "Good work, Mr. Hart," she said. They rode home through the afternoon light, and the light was different from the morning, warmer, more definite. The particular quality of winter light that comes after the worst of the day is over, and what's left is the clear, clean end of things. She and William rode side by side, and they talked, really talked the way they'd been learning to talk over 2 months, with the ease of people who have stopped editing themselves around each other. He told her about the first time he'd seen the eastern grazing land as a boy riding with his father, and his father pointing it out and saying, "This land feeds the herd, and the herd feeds us, and the land is what we're for." She told him about her father teaching her to keep accounts, sitting at the kitchen table on winter evenings. The particular patience her father had possessed when he was explaining numbers, how different that patient man had been from the trembling man at the table who had handed her the letter and looked away. "How is he?" William said. "Your father." She had seen him twice in the past 2 months. Short visits carefully managed around the reality that her father was still finding his way back to himself, and that finding took time and couldn't be rushed. "Better," she said. Slowly. "He asked about you actually, both times." "What did you tell him?" She thought about it. "I told him you were a man worth knowing," she said. "And that the ranch was in good shape." She paused. "And that Lily was going to be all right." William looked at her. "And that last part you believe that?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. He was quiet for a moment. "I believe it too," he said. "I didn't 6 months ago. I'm not sure I believed it the day you arrived, but now—" He stopped. "She called the mare Sunlight," he said. "Did I tell you?" "She told me herself," Evelyn said. 3 days ago. She came to the study specifically to tell me." "She came specifically to tell you," he repeated. Not incredulously, warmly. The particular warmth of a man noticing something important. "She did," Evelyn said. He looked at the road ahead. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant something was moving through him, being arranged into words, being prepared for the air. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. "The night after you arrived," he said. "I lay awake for a long time thinking about what I'd done, not with regret. I want to be clear about that. From the beginning, it didn't feel like something I regretted, but with the weight of it. I had asked a woman I'd known for 1 day to build her life in my house, and I'd done it because something in me recognized something in her, and I'd trusted that recognition, and the recognition felt true, but I knew that feelings that feel true are not always actually true, and I had—" He stopped. "I had been wrong about things before, at a very high cost." She listened. "And I lay there, and I thought if I've made a mistake, the damage isn't only mine. She's 24, and she came here to do a hard thing, and she did it with complete grace, and I've asked her to take on my house and my grief and my niece and my complication, and she's said yes, and if I'm wrong about who she is—" He paused. "That would be something I could not forgive myself for." "But you're not wrong," she said. Simply. "I know that now," he said. 2 months in. "I know it the way I know the land, not because I decided to know it, but because I've walked every inch of it, and it's proven itself under my feet." He looked at her. "I'm not wrong about you." She held that. She held it the way she held the important things firmly with both hands, because it was the kind of thing that deserved to be held carefully. "You're not wrong," she said. "And I'm not wrong about you." They came through this gate of Dawson Ridge with the late afternoon light behind them, and she felt the ranch, the way she had started to feel it somewhere in the 3rd week as hers. Not in the possessive, anxious way of someone guarding something they're afraid to lose, but in the deep, quiet, organic way of something that has become part of your understanding of yourself. Where you are and where you belong can be the same place. She had not known that before she rode down this road the first time, had not had evidence of it, had perhaps wondered if it was even possible for her, a woman who had been holding other people's lives together for so long. She had started to wonder if she had a life of her own to build. She knew now. Lily was waiting at the gate. She had positioned herself there with the patient certainty of a child who has decided something is going to happen and intends to be present when it does. When she saw their faces, she read them the way she read everything quickly, completely, with the interpretive skill that 2 years of careful watching had given her, and something in her own face changed. The last of it went, Evelyn thought. The last piece of the careful blankness, the armor that had made sense when the world kept taking things and had become unnecessary, now that the world had for once given something back. "We won," Lily said. "We won," William said. She stood there for a moment, and then she did something Evelyn had never seen her do. She smiled. Not the small tentative thing that had appeared on the back step during the knot lessons, not the surprised laugh that had escaped her on her birthday. A real smile, full and unguarded, the smile of a child who is completely and without qualification happy, and it transformed her face into something that was almost unbearably young and alive and present. Then she turned and ran back toward the house, shouting something to Mrs. Henley that Evelyn couldn't fully hear, but caught the shape of, and from inside the house came Mrs. Henley's voice in response, warm and declarative, and then the sound of something that might have been celebratory activity in the kitchen, because Mrs. Henley expressed most of her feelings through food, and had clearly been preparing for this outcome. William watched Lily run, and he was still beside Evelyn, and she was still beside him, and neither of them moved for a moment, just let themselves stand in it, in the fact of it, in the particular quality of this moment, in the thing that had happened to this house, and to these people over the course of 2 months, that had begun with a debt and a winter road and a letter that wasn't hers. "Come on," William said finally. Quietly. He offered her his hand. She took it. They walked through the gate together into the warmth and the noise that Lily had kicked loose inside the house, and Mrs. Henley came to the doorway with her apron on, and a look on her face that was as close to undone as Evelyn had ever seen her. And the kitchen smelled of something that would be wonderful, and the fire was going, and the house was exactly what a house is supposed to be, when the people inside it have decided with full knowledge of what it costs to build something worth building. In the weeks that followed, things settled into what they were not. The forced normalcy of people pretending, but the earned normalcy of people who have been through something real together and come out the other side knowing who they are to each other. William stopped holding himself at a professional remove in the evenings and started simply being in the same room with her because he wanted to be. Lily started coming to breakfast voluntarily without being asked, and she started talking at the table, actually talking about sunlight and the knot she'd been working on, and something she'd read, and a question she had about the grazing accounts, because she had started sitting in on those too, pulling up a chair beside Evelyn, with the serious, focused air of a child who intends to understand everything. Thomas Carter came to visit in March. He arrived looking older than she remembered, but cleaner, somehow cleaner, in the way a person looks when something that's been weighing on them has been lifted. He stood in the yard and looked at the house and the operation and the land, and then he looked at his daughter, and something moved through his face that was too complicated for a single name, but contained somewhere in it the particular relief of a man who sent his daughter into an uncertain situation out of his own failing and has discovered that she has turned it into something extraordinary. William shook his hand at the door, firmly, with the eye contact. Thomas Carter looked at the man his daughter had married and said quietly, "She deserved someone worth her." William looked at him steadily and said, "I know, I'm working on it." Thomas laughed. A real laugh surprised out of him, and Evelyn, standing behind them both, felt something complete itself, a circle closing an arc, finishing the long, difficult story of Thomas Carter's failure, arriving at a place he had not seen from the inside of it, a place that was not ruin, but continuation, not ending, but beginning. Her father stayed 3 days. On the last morning, he came to the study, where Evelyn was doing the weekly accounts, and he stood in the doorway, the way Lily used to stand in doorways, and he said, "Evie." She looked up. "I sent you into that man's yard to beg forgiveness," he said. His voice had the particular difficulty of a man saying something that has taken a long time to get to. "I was ashamed of myself then. I've been more ashamed every day since every time I thought about what I asked you to do." "Papa," she started. "Let me finish," he said. "I sent you to beg forgiveness, and you didn't beg anything. You walked in there and told the truth, and built something I never could have imagined from where I was sitting that morning." He stopped. His hands were not trembling. She noticed that the steadiness of them. "I'm sorry for what I asked you to carry. And I'm—" He stopped again and pressed his lips together, and when he looked at her, his eyes were full of something he had earned, something that had grown from the worst moment of his life into this. "I'm so proud of you, I don't have words for it." She stood up. She crossed the room, and she put her arms around her father, and he held on, and it was not the way fathers hold daughters when daughters need comfort, but the way two people hold each other when they've been through something hard and come out on the same side of it. "You raised me right, Papa," she said against his shoulder. "That's where it started." He made a sound that was not quite steady. "I'll take some credit for that," he said. She laughed. He laughed too. And in the hallway outside the study, she heard Lily pass by and pause. She knew the sound of Lily pausing, the small cessation of footsteps that meant the child was listening, taking in information, filing it the way Evelyn had taught her to file things in the place where important things were kept, and then continue on toward the kitchen, toward Mrs. Henley, toward sunlight, waiting in the paddock, toward the life that was hers and would remain hers. 3 months after Evelyn Carter rode through the gate of Dawson Ridge on a winter morning with someone else's letter in her pocket. William stood up at the monthly town meeting. He had not planned to speak. It was not on the agenda. He simply stood up when the general business was concluded and the room was preparing to disperse, and he stood there with the full, steady quality of a man who knows what he means to say and means every word of it. The room went quiet. "I want to say something to this community," he said, "about what's happened these past months, about what I've learned." He paused. "I came into this year as a man who had convinced himself that running alone was the same as running strong, that keeping people at a distance was the same as being capable." He looked at Evelyn across the room directly, without managing it or qualifying it. "I was wrong about that. I was shown I was wrong about it by a woman who rode 19 miles through a Wyoming winter to tell me the truth when she could have told me anything comfortable, and I would have had to accept it." He paused. "I thought I was offering her something when I asked her to stay. She was the one who gave. She gave this operation its integrity back. She gave my niece her smile back. She gave me—" He stopped. His jaw set. He finished. "She gave me back the thing I had stopped believing I still had. A home." The room was completely quiet. Then Clara Beaumont began to applaud, and the room followed. Evelyn sat in her chair in the community hall of Hatcher's Creek, Wyoming, in the year 1884, and she felt the sound of it around her, not overwhelming, not requiring anything from her. Just present, just the community bearing witness to the true version of a story that had been told wrong at first and was now being told right. She looked at William still standing. He looked back at her, and she thought about a winter morning and a cold road and a letter in her pocket, and the moment she had decided not to beg, not to plead, not to be small in the way the situation seemed to require, but to simply tell the truth as clearly and completely as she could, and see what happened when you did. What happened was this. This house, this man, this child who ran through paddocks and laughed without planning to, and had named her horse Sunlight, and would grow up knowing that the world could be trusted sometimes if you trusted it first. What happened was a life she had not known she was building until she was already inside it. What happened was a home, her home, truly hers, earned not through transaction, or transaction alone, but through the hardest and the simplest and the most irreducible act. She knew, telling the truth, standing in it, and refusing to leave until the truth had done what it came to do. Evelyn Carter Dawson pressed her hand flat on her knee, the way she always did when something settled into its final and permanent shape, and she breathed, and she let it be what it was. Complete. Real. Hers.